Welcome, dear listener. Today I'm going to explain the entire history of Yokohama, so get comfy. You will experience an amazing sleep. Let's start with part 1. Yokohama, one of Japan's busiest port cities today, known for its shining waterfront and lively atmosphere. But before it became a center of trade and international contact, it was little more than a cluster of quiet fishing villages on the edge of Edo Bay, now Tokyo Bay. Over many centuries, Yokohama grew slowly, shaped by the land, the sea, and changes within Japan itself. In this first part, we will explore the area's ancient roots, from prehistoric tribes who fished and farmed here, to the samurai era that saw small villages thrive under the rule of faraway lords. By the late Edo period, 1603–1868, Yokohama was on the edge of big changes, but hardly anyone suspected how suddenly and powerfully those changes would come. So get comfortable, let your mind settle, and picture gentle waves lapping against a quiet shore long ago. These are the beginnings of Yokohama, before the foreign ships, grand ports, and bright city lights. Chapter 1. The land before the name. Early people and coastal life. Long before anyone spoke of Yokohama, this region of low hills and calm bays was home to Japan's earliest cultures. Archaeologists have found shell mounds, stone tools, and pottery that prove humans lived here thousands of years ago. During the Jomon period, about 14,000 to 300 before the Common Era, small groups of hunters and gatherers roamed the shoreline, collecting clams, fish, and other sea life. They also gathered acorns and chestnuts from the nearby forests. The bay's mild climate and abundant resources provided enough food for people to live relatively peacefully. Later, the Yayoi period, 300 before the Common Era to 300 Common Era, introduced rice farming to the country. As farmers began cultivating paddies in flat, fertile areas, villages took shape. In those days, the area around modern Yokohama was not a central power hub, but rather a set of scattered hamlets. People grew rice, raised a few animals, and fished. Rivers like the Yoka and Surumi carried nutritious soil downstream, making the plains fertile. Though overshadowed by bigger regional centers, these small groups laid the basic foundations of everyday life: farming, fishing, worshipping local spirits in small shrines, and building a sense of place along the bay's edge. Slowly, these tiny settlements learned to connect with each other through simple paths and small wooden boats. Over hundreds of years, that sense of connection and local knowledge of the sea would grow stronger, preparing the region for future developments in Japan's medieval and feudal times. Chapter 2. Medieval milestones. Samurai power and early port foundations. With the rise of samurai-led governments in the Kamakura period, 1185–1333 Common Era and beyond, many parts of the Kanto region became more organized under warrior clans. The city of Kamakura, located not far from modern Yokohama, became the seat of the shogunate. That center of power drew people, goods, and attention away from smaller coastal villages, including those near present-day Yokohama. Still, the coastline kept its modest importance for fishing and trading within local networks. During the Muromachi period, 1336–1573 Common Era, these fishing villages likely saw an increase in boat activity. Small wharves, simple wood platforms, or stone edges appeared to help move fish, rice, and simple manufactured goods. Clans like the Honjo and Usugi held sway, competing for control over the Kanto region. Although these local ports were minor, they provided everyday supplies like fresh seafood and salt to bigger domains, and sometimes to Kamakura or early Edo Tokyo. People in these communities lived relatively simple lives, guided by the rhythms of the sea and the seasons. They fished, farmed, prayed at local shrines or temples, and obeyed the warrior lord's rules. Samurai seldom visited unless they needed to collect taxes in rice or fish, but local boat builders and fisherfolk grew skilled in navigating the bays and rivers, skills that later generations would expand when foreign ships eventually arrived. Chapter 3. The Tokugawa grip, Yokohama. During the Edo period, everything shifted when Tokugawa Ieyasu established his shogunate in Edo around the year 1603. The Edo period brought peace to much of Japan for over 250 years. During this time, Edo, modern-day Tokyo, grew into one of the world's largest cities, fueling trade in all directions. Though Yokohama was still not a famous name, its location near Edo Bay put it within the orbit of Edo's vast demand for fish, rice, vegetables, and crafts. Under Senkin Kotai laws, feudal lords daimyo were required to travel back and forth between their home provinces and Edo. They often passed through or near Kanagawa Post Station on the Tokaido Road, just up the coast from present-day Yokohama. While Yokohama itself was just a group of small fishing villages, the region slowly began to see more economic activity, farms producing goods for Edo, boats shipping fresh fish or dried sardines, and local merchants trading in the shadows of bigger post towns. Strict Sakoku policies. Japan's isolation from most foreign nations meant no official overseas contact for Yokohama's tiny ports. Only Nagasaki in the far south had limited trade with the Dutch and Chinese. So while ships traveled throughout coastal Japan, bringing goods and news, few foreigners landed in places like Yokohama. Life remained quiet. Folks attended festivals at local shrines, grew crops, fixed fishing nets, and rarely interacted with people beyond the region, unless they traveled into Edo. Chapter 4. Early Seeds of Maritime Importance. Life by the bay. Despite the overshadowing presence of Edo, these coastal villages around Yokohama developed a deep maritime culture. Fishermen learned the best spots and seasons for mackerel, sardines, sea bream, and shellfish. Boatwrights fashioned small but sturdy wooden vessels. When storms struck, communities banded together to rescue each other. At local shrines, people prayed for safe voyages and thanked the gods for good catches. Some families specialized in net making, salt production, or simple seafood processing. Rice farmers, for their part, benefited from fertile fields watered by small rivers. As a result, the coastal folks had varied diets and a sense of independence. They might sell or barter their extra produce to traveling merchants heading toward Edo. The daily routine of sea and farm shaped a calm way of living that balanced with the hierarchical rule of the Tokugawa era. Local festivals celebrated both land and sea. In some events, villagers paraded decorated boats or carried portable shrines, makoshi, to honor local gods. Music and dance enlivened these occasions, forging strong communal ties. While no one suspected these fishing towns would become major gateways to the outside world, the knowledge they gained about tides, storms, and navigation would soon prove essential. Chapter 5. Late Edo shifts. Kanagawa Post Station and nearby coastal towns. By the early 1800s, Edo's population soared past 1 million, spurring greater movement along the highways. Kanagawa Post Station near present-day Yokohama grew busier as daimyo retinues, traveling merchants, and other travelers passed. Some local families prospered by offering lodging, food, and horse feed. Although Yokohama remained overshadowed by places like Kanagawa, the general region benefited from Edo's demands. Merchants near the bay sold fish and produce to feed Edo's hungry masses. More roads and small ferries popped up, connecting villages so farmers and fishermen could more easily bring their goods to markets. Meanwhile, news of the wider world occasionally trickled in. Stories of Western ships off distant shores, Chinese trade issues, and the rising ambition of foreign empires. Still, the Tokugawa government's isolation laws meant no official foreign trade in Yokohama's harbor. Locals rarely saw foreign vessels. On the surface, life continued as it had for generations, but a deep current of change flowed. Edo's tight demands on farmland, the need to feed a booming population, and a hush of rumors about barbarian ships hinting that something beyond Japan's horizon might soon arrive. By the 1850s, Edo's hold began loosening as Western powers pressed for open ports, and Yokohama's quiet fishing shores stood on the edge of that whirlwind. Chapter 6. Western Intrusions. The edge of Sakoku's collapse. During the early 1800s, more Western ships ventured into Japanese waters, seeking trade or searching for supplies. Local fishermen from areas near Yokohama occasionally glimpsed these unfamiliar vessels. They might return home with stories of strange flags and cannons, fueling worry about how Japan could remain closed if foreign navies demanded entry. The Tokugawa shogunate tried to reinforce isolation, issuing orders to drive off or punish foreign ships, yet such orders were hard to enforce across the entire coastline. Some samurai advisors realized Japan lagged in naval technology. In secret, certain domains studied Rangaku Dutch learning, looking at Western science, ship design and medicine, but official policy remained to exclude foreign contact. Villagers stayed mostly out of these high-level debates, though a few boatwrights began copying interesting shapes or rigging from glimpses of foreign hulls. On quiet nights, rumors about foreign invasions or advanced Western weapons spread fear and curiosity. Despite the hush, these overseas intrusions set the stage for bigger events. The arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's black ships near Edo in 1853-1854 shocked the entire country, showing how vulnerable Japan's old defenses were to modern warships. Although these famous visits happened near Edo Bay rather than Yokohama specifically, they signaled that the end of isolation Sakoku was near. The city we call Yokohama was about to experience a transformation beyond anyone's imagination. Chapter 7. The final years of Sakoku. Tension in coastal communities. As the Tokugawa government wrestled with foreign demands, local fishermen, farmers and small merchants around Kanagawa and Yokohama felt uneasy. Some insisted on preserving tradition, while others sensed economic opportunities in foreign trade. The trolls by domain samurai increased, ensuring no one dealt with foreigners illegally. Meanwhile, Edo's top officials faced immense pressure: accept treaties or risk war. In local shrines and taverns, people whispered about new kinds of cannons, foreign coins, or exotic fabrics. The closed country laws had been so strict for so long that just thinking of open trade seemed radical. Samurai loyalists threatened to attack any foreign presence, but some shrewd traders saw potential in selling fish, rice, or crafts to new customers and making bigger profits than ever before. Uncertainty hung over these villages like a fog. No one knew if or when the gates would truly open, or how violent things might become. Yet real cracks in isolation had begun. When the Treaty of Kanagawa 1854 granted limited concessions to the United States, it became clear bigger changes might soon come. At first, these new allowances applied mostly to ports like Shimoda and Hakodate, but for watchers in Kanagawa, the writing was on the wall. More foreign treaties were surely on the way, possibly making a port somewhere in this region the center of foreign trade. Everyday life went on, mending nets, tending rice fields, but the sea winds carried hints of an approaching storm. Chapter 8. Glimmers of change, treaties and rumors of a new port. By the late 1850s, more foreign powers demanded official trade with Japan. New treaties followed, promising that certain Japanese ports would open to Western merchants and consuls. For a while, the government proposed Kanagawa itself, which sat along the Tokaido, as an open port. But after some reflection, officials decided that a nearby cove, Yokohama village, might be more suitable for controlling foreign activity. It was close enough to Edo for oversight, yet still slightly removed from the main post town. At first, local fisherfolk and small merchants were torn. Some feared foreigners would bring strange diseases or challenge samurai authority. Others imagined wealth from providing supplies, lodging, or other services to foreign ships. Overland gossip mentioned new jobs in port construction, loading and unloading cargo, and potential sale of local produce at higher prices. The swirl of excitement and dread grew with each new snippet of news from Edo. Many realized that if foreign ships truly arrived, Yokohama's entire future would change in the blink of an eye. While the shogunate hammered out details, allowing foreign consuls, setting custom duties, dividing land for treaty port enclaves, the small coastal hamlets braced for the unknown. Elderly villagers clung to old ways, having grown up in an era when foreign contact was nearly a crime. Younger folk, more curious or hungry for opportunity, prepared to adapt. In truth, no one grasped the scale of what was about to unfold once the port officially opened. Chapter 9. Nearing a historic crossroads, Yokohama on the brink. By 1858,
The Treaty of Amity and Commerce with the United States made it almost certain that Kanagawa and effectively nearby Yokohama would become a treaty port. Samurai loyalists in some domains raged at these unequal treaties, claiming they trampled on Japanese sovereignty. But the Tokugawa regime felt cornered by superior Western navies and technology. If they refused, a military clash could devastate Edo and surrounding lands. In the local area, carpenters, farmers, and fishermen wondered how building wharves and foreign settlements would affect them. Some landowners worried about losing property if the government claimed it for new roads or consular buildings. Others pictured rising land values, more customers for fish or produce, and new crafts to learn. The final years of the Edo period shimmered with tension as the old social order faced pressures from both inside reform-minded samurai merchants and outside Western powers. Culturally, many still observed everyday traditions, festivals praising sea gods, dinners of simple grilled fish, and visits to local temples. Yet the hush of approaching changes was unmistakable. Edo itself churned with rumors of rebellion or modernization. Kanagawa and Yokohama's coastal hamlets seemed to stand at a threshold, remain rural fishing outposts, or pivot to bustling international centers. The moment of truth was mere seasons away. Chapter 10. Conclusion of Part 1. Poised on the edge of transformation as the Edo period drew to a close, the small shoreline communities that formed Yokohama were on the cusp of a great upheaval. What had been a life of fishing, rice farming, and quiet trade would soon be upended by foreign consuls, steam-powered ships, and global commerce. For centuries, local folks had lived in the shadow of Edo, contributing fish and produce to feed the big city. Now, Western nations were forcing Japan to open ports, and Yokohama's bay turned out to be the perfect spot to host this new age. In this first installment, we traveled from prehistoric shell mounds to the final years of strict isolation. Next, in Part 2, we will see how Yokohama's official opening as a treaty port erupted into a period of fast-paced development. Foreign residents arrived, new industries bloomed, and Japan itself pivoted from feudal rule to the fresh, often chaotic currents of the Meiji era. We will uncover how Yokohama soared into global relevance, changing not only this once sleepy coastline but also the fate of an entire nation. For now, let these calm images of fishing boats, quiet shrines, and gentle coastlines lull your mind. The bustle of future ports and foreign steamships can wait until you are ready for the next stage of Yokohama's story.
Part 2. Opening the port. Yokohama's leap into global trade. In Part 1, we explored how Yokohama remained a cluster of small coastal settlements throughout Japan's long isolation, the Edo period. At that time, life was governed by fishing seasons, local shrines, and quiet commerce. But as foreign powers pressed for open ports in the mid-1800s, everything changed. The Tokugawa shogunate, under threat of modern Western warships, found itself forced to sign treaties allowing foreign trade. This shift would catapult Yokohama from a sleepy waterfront into a bustling hub of diplomacy, business, and cultural exchange. In Part 2, we witnessed the arrival of foreign ships, the birth of a new international port, and the first steps toward the modernization of both Yokohama and Japan. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scene: wooden fishing boats bobbing near the shore, local villagers in simple robes, going about their daily tasks, when on the horizon you spot tall-masted Western ships with billowing sails. The city is about to step onto the global stage, and the everyday calm of centuries is about to give way to steam-powered transformations and an influx of new faces and ideas. Chapter 1. The treaty port emerges. From Kanagawa to Yokohama. By 1858, the Tokugawa shogunate had signed the Treaty of Amity and Commerce with the United States, as well as similar deals with other Western nations, Britain, France, Russia, and more. Initially, the plan was to open Kanagawa, an established post town near the Tokudal Road, to foreign ships. Yet the government soon realized that Kanagawa was directly on a major highway, and foreign presence might create social unrest or disrupt daimyo processions. Officials also worried about controlling foreigners so close to Edo, modern Tokyo. As a solution, they decided to move the designated foreign port slightly down the bay to a quieter fishing village called Yokohama. In 1859, Yokohama was officially declared open for international trade. At first, foreign diplomats and merchants arrived expecting Kanagawa itself to be the treaty port. Instead, they were guided across the bay, or along local roads to Yokohama's waterfront. Some complained about muddy paths and the lack of infrastructure, but soon they saw the advantage. The inlet was calm and well suited for anchoring big ships, with enough land to set up consulates and trading houses away from heavy Japanese foot traffic. Chapter 2. Early foreign arrivals and the creation of the settlement, with Yokohama now designated for foreign trade. Western powers wasted no time. Steamships and tall-masted schooners brought diplomats, merchants, sailors and adventurers from places like the United States, Britain and France. The local fishing families looked on with a mix of awe and anxiety. Almost overnight, new buildings arose on reclaimed land near the shore, consular offices, warehouses and simple wooden houses for foreign residents. This zone became known as the Foreign Settlement. For safety and control, the shogunate built boundaries, sometimes literal fences or moats, to separate the foreign district from the Japanese side. Checkpoints regulated who could enter. Interpreters became invaluable, bridging language gaps between foreigners and local officials. Many of these interpreters had studied Dutch, the main Western language taught in Japan for centuries, and scrambled to pick up English or French. Commerce bloomed right away. Foreign merchants sought silk, tea, and other Japanese goods to ship home, while also bringing machinery, textiles and items never seen by most Japanese. People in Edo traveled miles just to catch glimpses of the foreign settlement's curious sights. Men in Western suits, horse-drawn carriages, and women wearing hoop skirts. Some local fisherfolk found jobs ferrying visitors across the bay, or supplying the foreign kitchens with fish and produce. But tensions also smoldered. Some samurai, loyal to the imperial court or opposed to foreign presence, attacked foreigners in isolated incidents. The shogunate, desperate to avoid conflict with powerful Western navies, stationed extra guards and tried to keep the peace. Fear mingled with fascination. Such was the environment in these early days of the port, an uneasy balance of curiosity, trade, excitement, and potential violence. Chapter 3. Growth and challenges, silk, tea, and turmoil. As Yokohama's foreign trade took off, two key exports quickly dominated: silk and tea. Japan's raw silk, produced mainly in regions like Gunma or Nagano, traveled through Edo to Yokohama's new docks, then boarded Western ships bound for markets in Europe and America. Similarly, Japanese green tea, long treasured locally, found eager buyers overseas. Money poured in, benefiting local merchants, domain lords, and newly formed trading companies. In turn, Yokohama's foreign residents imported clocks, glassware, medicines, and manufactured goods that intrigued Japanese buyers. However, the city struggled with sudden expansion. Roads were muddy and prone to flooding. Sewage systems barely existed. Fire was a constant fear, since most buildings were wooden, and public order remained delicate. Samurai from anti-foreign factions roamed in anger over the unequal treaties, while some local rowdies clashed with foreign sailors in the lively waterfront taverns. The shogunate assigned troops and police to keep calm, but the abrupt changes stretched their resources. In this swirl, a new class of Japanese entrepreneurs emerged, people who sold shipping services, housing, or entertainment to foreigners. Boatmen charged fees for ferry rides across the harbor. Craftsmen built Western-style furniture. Eateries began serving Western dishes, though often with a Japanese twist. Over time, these cross-cultural blends would shape Yokohama's distinct identity, a place where East and West mingled in everyday life, from food stalls to music halls. Chapter 4. Architectural transformations and reclaimed land. To accommodate foreign trade and new residents, the Tokugawa government embarked on a series of land reclamation projects in Yokohama. Workers piled earth and stones into shallow water near the coast, creating flat ground for warehouses, shops, and foreign homes. This process was difficult. Many local laborers were pressed into service, building embankments with simple tools. Over time, new streets formed in a grid-like pattern, something unusual in traditional Japanese towns. Showhouses with wooden frames rose quickly, featuring a mixture of Japanese construction styles and some Western touches. like glass windows or tall ceilings. The foreign settlement itself became a curious blend of Western architecture and local flavor. Brick or stone structures, more resistant to fire, stood next to Japanese inns or tea houses. Pubs, tailor shops and photography studios aimed at foreign customers appeared. Meanwhile, Japanese cart drivers, laundry workers and food vendors sought to meet foreigners' needs, learning basic English or other languages. Those who adapted quickly to these new demands often prospered, but such rapid building had downsides. Poor drainage led to foul-smelling ditches, and a lack of consistent building codes meant fires could spread. Earthquakes, not uncommon in the Kanto region, sometimes damaged fragile new structures. Still, the city pressed onward. The transformation was unstoppable. Within just a few years, Yokohama had grown from a sleepy fishing inlet into a noisy construction site, alive with hammering, saws, and the shouts of laborers. Chapter 5, Samurai Turmoil, and the fall of the shogunate. Yokohama's opening contributed to a broader crisis within Japan. Many samurai despised foreign influence, blaming the Tokugawa shogunate for betraying centuries of tradition. Some imperial loyalist Sunojoi supporters launched attacks on foreigners or assassinated pro-Western officials. In 1862, the infamous Namamugi incident occurred just north of Yokohama, where British nationals were attacked by a samurai procession for not showing proper respect on the Tokaido Road. This event led to British demands for compensation, and even bombardment of certain domains that refused to cooperate. Such clashes eroded the shogunate's authority. As violence fled, foreign powers stationed warships in Yokohama's bay, ready to defend their citizens. The city sometimes felt under siege, with naval cannons pointed at the town to ensure local compliance. Meanwhile, the power struggle in Edo heated up, culminating in the Meiji Restoration of 1868. With Emperor Meiji restored as the central figure, the old Tokugawa government collapsed. Yet through this chaos, Yokohama's trade kept humming. Merchants who shipped silk abroad earned profits that rivaled or surpassed older merchant houses in Edo. Some domain leaders realized the money from foreign trade could buy modern weapons, ships and knowledge, vital for any domain that wanted to survive the new age. Thus, even as swords clashed in politics, commerce in Yokohama pressed on, bridging old feudal ways and fresh global ties. Chapter 6, Early Meiji Upheaval, Port Growth and the New Government. When the new Meiji government took over in 1868, it vowed to modernize Japan at lightning speed. Yokohama was already a prime example of what foreign contact could bring: ships from around the world, new businesses, new foods and new ideas. The Meiji leaders recognized Yokohama's importance as Japan's window to Western trade and technology. They poured resources into improving the port, policing it carefully, and encouraging more commerce. Roads between Yokohama and Tokyo were upgraded to handle heavier traffic. Trains soon became a possibility, as Japan's first railway line opened between Shimbashi, Tokyo and Yokohama in 1872. This 29-kilometer route was a huge step for a nation that just years earlier had only feudal highways. Steam locomotives chugging along the tracks became a powerful symbol of Meiji progress. In the city itself, foreign residents now living under extraterritorial rights, meaning they followed their home country's laws, not Japan's, expanded their enclaves. Clubs, churches and schools sprang up, forging small Western communities in the heart of Japan. Meanwhile, many Japanese saw these enclaves as sources of knowledge, teaching Western medicine, engineering, and language. The Meiji authorities, eager to modernize, sometimes sent promising students to Yokohama to brush up on English or engineering before traveling overseas. Still, frustrations lingered. Locals disliked that foreign concessions were beyond Japanese control. Some felt their traditions were being ignored as modernization advanced. Yet few could deny that Yokohama was forging new wealth and roles for thousands of people, from dock workers to interpreters and entrepreneurs. The city's destiny as a major port was now solidifying under Meiji rule. Chapter 7, Silk Road by Sea. Yokohama, as an export giant, of all the products streaming through Yokohama, raw silk became the star. Japan's countryside produced high-quality silk cocoons,
which were wound into threads at modernizing mills. Foreign traders in Yokohama eagerly bought these threads to send to textile factories in Europe and America. The silk trade soared, fueling economic booms for Japan's rural producers and for Yokohama's shipping companies. Tens of thousands of bales left the port each year, turning the city into a global name in the textile market. In addition to silk, tea remained a top export. Wealthy English or American merchants purchased Japanese green tea for consumers back home, sometimes blending it with other teas. Other items such as lacquerware and copper also found eager buyers overseas. In exchange, Japan imported Western machinery, cotton cloth, chemicals and glassware. The lively flow of goods not only enriched local and foreign merchants but also introduced many ordinary Japanese to Western goods at lower prices. Yokohama's warehouses bustled with activity from dawn till dusk. Ship technology advanced too. Steam-powered vessels replaced many older sailing ships, arriving with bigger cargoes. Large shipping lines, some led by Western investors, others formed by new Japanese entrepreneurs, set up regular schedules to Shanghai, Hong Kong, San Francisco and beyond. Dock laborers found steady work loading and unloading crates, barrels and heavy bales of silk. Hotels near the wharf accommodated traveling merchants or tourists exploring this modern wonder. To many Japanese from rural regions, visiting Yokohama felt like stepping into a different world full of foreigners, tall chimneys and noisy steam engines. Chapter 8: Social changes and the rise of mixed cultures. As trade flourished, so did Yokohama's cultural melting pot. Foreigners from numerous nations lived side by side in the settlement, each bringing unique customs. Churches of various denominations rose, while French patisseries and British pubs dotted the streets. Beyond the settlement, Japanese craftspeople adapted Western ideas into clothing, furniture, and architecture. A new generation of artisans used glass windows, cast iron stoves or brick walls, blending foreign styles with local aesthetics. The presence of so many foreigners also led to a rise in translators and teachers. Language schools opened, teaching English, French or Chinese. Outspoken samurai who turned into scholars or journalists found in Yokohama a trove of reading material, foreign newspapers, science texts, political pamphlets. These influences helped shape the broader Meiji reforms, which aimed to abolish feudal classes, modernize laws and promote industry. Of course, not everyone welcomed these changes. Traditional farmers or shopkeepers sometimes felt overshadowed by fancy Western shops or big merchant houses. Samurai, stripped of their old privileges, worried about losing status in a new world that valued commercial success. Even some foreigners argued among themselves about how open or exclusive their enclave should be. Yet the city thrived overall, forging an atmosphere of openness and novelty that drew curious minds and bold entrepreneurs from near and far. Chapter 9: Modernizing Infrastructure, Railways, Harbors and Lights. During the 1870s and 1880s, the new Meiji government poured effort into building Japan's first railroads. The inaugural line between Shinbashi, Tokyo and Yokohama was only the start. As tracks extended further inland, it became easier to bring produce, silk cocoons and other goods from rural areas directly to Yokohama's port. This drastically cut transport times and costs, boosting exports. Passengers also took advantage of these trains, turning day trips to Yokohama into a popular pastime. Some traveled just to see the foreign settlement or shop at exotic stores selling Western clothes and fancy goods. The harbor, too, underwent modernization. Wooden piers gave way to stronger quays, often with steel or stone foundations. Gas lamps and later electric lights began to illuminate the streets, reducing nighttime hazards. Horse-drawn carriages and rickshaws shared the roads, weaving between pedestrians in layered kimonos or Western suits. Telecommunication advanced. Telegraph wires connected Yokohama with Tokyo and other cities, allowing swift exchange of shipping updates or financial news. All these improvements did not come cheap. The Meiji government borrowed funds from foreign banks, and local businesses hustled to keep pace with new fees, new rules and foreign competition. The city's skyline slowly shifted to include modern factories and red brick warehouses. Smokestacks puffed smoke into the air, a sign of industrial progress but also a cause of pollution that concerned some citizens. Despite the growing pains, Yokohama by the 1880s was recognized as Japan's leading international port, an emblem of how swiftly the country had joined the global economy. Chapter 10: A New Identity. Yokohama on the world stage. By the late 19th century, Yokohama was no longer a cluster of fishing villages. It stood as a symbol of Japan's transformation from a closed feudal land to a modern power linked by trade and technology to every continent. Steamship lines carried Japanese silks and teas across oceans, while returning vessels brought new gadgets, fashions, and cultural ideas. Western newspapers reported on Yokohama's growth, praising its strategic harbor and contrasting it with older traditional cities in Japan. Within the city, a unique culture of blending East and West took root. Cafes serving both green tea and coffee, shops selling both kimonos and suits. Many travelers, diplomats, scientists, artists, arrived in Yokohama first, forming their first impression of Japan. Some found it enchanting, others were baffled by local manners. Guides or interpreters walked them around bustling streets and narrow alleys, explaining everything from chopstick use to temple etiquette. Meanwhile, Japanese youth who learned foreign languages in Yokohama might venture abroad, returning with fresh visions of democracy, science, and social reforms. These travelers and scholars often shaped Meiji Japan's direction in education, law, and industry. Still, not all was bright. The foreigners in Yokohama enjoyed extraterritorial rights, meaning they were subject to their own country's laws, not Japan's. The Meiji government resented these unequal treaties, and tensions about sovereignty continued. Locals sometimes chafed at foreign arrogance or the wealth gap, yet the city's overall momentum leaned toward progress and adaptation. Where fishermen once dozed in the afternoon sun, cargo cranes and factory whistles now signaled a vibrant new era. Thus, by around 1890, Yokohama had firmly arrived on the world stage, a port city humming with energy, bridging old Edo Bay traditions and a modern outward-facing Japan. This sets the scene for subsequent developments in the late Meiji era and beyond: more industrial growth, deeper cultural interchanges, and eventually the trials of war, earthquakes, and reconstruction that would come in the 20th century.
Part 3: Yokohama, from late Meiji to the early 1900s, Growth, Change, and the Path to Modern Times. Chapter 1: The City Blossoms under Meiji Modernization. By the late 19th century, Yokohama was no longer just a port where foreign ships came and went. It had blossomed into a lively city, boasting modern roads, telegraph lines, and factories. The Meiji government, keen to develop industry and technology, favored Yokohama as one of Japan's leading trade centers. Newly formed Japanese banks and trading companies set up offices there, side by side with foreign merchants who had arrived earlier. The city's population swelled as people from the countryside sought work in warehouses, dockyards, or newly built factories. With its mix of Japanese and foreign residents, Yokohama felt different from other cities in Japan. You might see a Japanese rickshaw driver wearing a Western-style cap, or an English businessman trying out chopsticks at a local eatery. The once quiet village vibe had vanished, replaced by the constant bustle of train whistles, clanging metalworks, and horse-drawn carriages rumbling over cobblestone streets. Railroads played a key role in this transformation. The first line between Yokohama and Tokyo had opened in 1872, but by the 1890s, more routes extended further inland. Silk, tea, and other goods moved quickly to the port for export, while imported textiles, machinery, and even foreign foods rode inland to new markets. The speed of rail transit spurred fresh business models. Merchants could promise faster delivery to customers, and travelers could make day trips for sightseeing or shopping. At this time, many visitors came simply to see the foreign district with its brick buildings, Western restaurants, and gaslit sidewalks, finding it both exciting and a little strange compared to more traditional Japanese towns. Chapter 2: Cultural Bridges and Changing Lifestyles. As Yokohama grew, so did its role as a cultural bridge between Japan and the outside world. Foreign residents started private schools teaching English, French, or German. Churches offered language lessons and music recitals. sometimes open to curious Japanese neighbors. Meanwhile, newspapers printed in multiple languages circulated, carrying news about foreign politics, local events, and shipping schedules. Some Japanese families, living near the foreign settlement, adapted Western customs, wearing suits or dresses, trying out bread or beef dishes, and learning new dance steps from overseas instructors. At the same time, foreign communities became more comfortable in Japan, with British or American merchants dining on local grilled fish, adopting tatami rooms, and wearing yukata robes on hot summer evenings. Yokohama's daily sights reflected this blend: a row of wooden townhouses next to a Western-style brick consulate, or an evening party where a samurai in a hari coat chatted with a European diplomat in a tailcoat. Entertainment also evolved. Traditional kabuki troupes might perform next to circuses with foreign acrobats or traveling musicians. Venues offered a variety of amusements, from classical Japanese puppet shows to Western brass bands. The city's growth in print media meant local readers could see woodblock prints celebrating new industrial marvels or read about scientific discoveries overseas. This cross-pollination of ideas fueled the modernization mood that spread throughout Japan. But Yokohama, in particular, served as a meeting point where novelty mingled with tradition every day. Chapter 3: The Sino-Japanese War and Growing National Pride. In the late 19th century, Japan's military ambitions began to rise. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894-1895, broke out, pitting Japan against China for influence in Korea. Though the battlefield lay far from Yokohama, the port city felt the war's impact. Soldiers and supplies moved through the harbor. Newspapers published in Yokohama reported on Japan's unexpected victories, stirring national pride. Local factories produced goods to support the war effort, and shipping lines carried troops or materials. When Japan triumphed, it shocked many Western observers who had assumed Japan was still behind industrially. For Yokohama, this victory brought confidence. More foreign traders recognized Japan as a growing power, raising the city's profile as a gateway to an emerging empire. Economic success soared, with businesses catering to new opportunities in East Asia. This also boosted the local Japanese population's sense of national identity. Symbols of modernization, like steamships or Western-style uniforms, became linked with Japan's pride, reflected in celebratory processions and rising demand for modern goods. However, some citizens worried that the rapid modernization and overseas ambitions carried risks. People in Yokohama saw firsthand how foreign entanglements could bring conflict. Merchants weighed the gains from new markets against the possibility of deeper military involvement. Even so, the city's outward focus remained strong, with the port continuing to handle growing volumes of exports and imports. Young men found chances to become clerks or interpreters for newly formed shipping companies or trading firms, eager to ride the wave of Japan's success. Chapter 4: Technological Advances and Infrastructure Upgrades. By the turn of the 20th century, Yokohama's leaders worked to enhance the city's infrastructure so it could handle bigger ships and more cargo. The harbor area was deepened, and stronger piers made of iron and stone replaced older wooden docks. Warehouses used brick or stone walls to minimize fire damage. Streets near the waterfront were widened and paved, making it easier for horse-drawn carts and eventually, early automobiles to transport goods. Gas lamps gave way to electric streetlights, illuminating the busy nights with a modern glow. The local government also encouraged better sewage and drainage, especially after issues with flooding or waterborne illness. Over time, some neighborhoods gained running water and improved roads, though older districts lagged behind. Electricity spread from the port district outward, powering factories, shop signs, and a few electric tram lines that connected the harbor to surrounding residential areas. Inside these factories you might find steam turbines, machine presses and mechanical looms spinning threads at faster rates than ever before. Across the city, rail expansion continued. Extra tracks and new stations allowed easier travel to Tokyo and beyond. Passenger trains carried salarymen,
students and day trippers, while freight trains hauled raw materials like coal or cotton. Yokohama's ambition was to be as advanced as any European or American city in terms of port facilities and city planning. Yet these improvements came with a cost. Local taxpayers plus foreign loans financed much of the development, sometimes leading to heated debates over city spending priorities. Chapter 5: Social shifts and the emergence of a middle class. As industry and trade blossomed, Yokohama's middle class began to expand. Skilled factory workers, office clerks and shop owners earned enough to live more comfortably than farmers or laborers in past generations. Middle-class families could afford to live in new neighborhoods with better roads and sanitation. They bought Western-style furniture, tried new electric home appliances like fans and lamps, and joined cultural clubs. Families might dress in a mix of kimono and Western suits, hosting small dinner parties where they served both rice dishes and bread. Education rose in importance. Parents enrolled children in schools that taught English, math, science and sometimes foreign etiquette. Girls too found new opportunities. Although traditional attitudes about women's roles persisted, some progressive schools taught girls domestic sciences combined with basic foreign languages, aiming to cultivate modern wives and mothers. Others introduced Western music lessons, so you might hear the strains of piano music drifting from open windows in certain neighborhoods. Cafes and tea parlors became spots where middle-class men, and sometimes women, gathered to read newspapers or talk about local politics. Clubs formed for reading foreign literature, discussing new technology, or studying political reforms. The mixture of foreign influence and homegrown aspiration made Yokohama a test ground for fresh ideas, from public health campaigns to more liberal social norms. Yet not all shared equally in this progress. Poorer laborers in dock areas continued to struggle, often working long hours under difficult conditions, with minimal job security or health benefits. Chapter 6: The Russo-Japanese War and Heightened Global Standing. Around the early 1900s, Japan faced its second major international conflict, the Russo-Japanese War 1904-1905. In Yokohama, the war's echoes were again felt as supplies, troops and news bulletins passed through the port. Many Western nations watched with surprise or skepticism as Japan battled a European power, but Japan's victory established it firmly as a modern military force, and Yokohama gained further global respect. Traders from around the world saw that Japan could compete on the world stage, leading more foreign firms to set up branches in the city. When the war ended, returning soldiers and war heroes arrived in Yokohama to cheering crowds. Parades celebrated Japan's rise, and local newspapers put out extra editions to mark each victory or peace milestone. Profits soared for shipping lines carrying war-related cargo or new deals from territories gained in the war's aftermath. Some younger Japanese, enamored by the West's advanced tech and Japan's newfound power, wanted to push modernization even faster. But the war had a darker side too. It cost many lives and strained the economy with military spending. Families who lost sons or husbands faced grief and hardship. Communicable diseases sometimes spread among cramped barracks and returned with troops. Debate grew in Yokohama about whether future wars might overshadow the city's trade-based prosperity. For now, though, the mood was largely triumphant, fueling confidence in further modernization, as well as an ongoing sense that Yokohama was Japan's shining port to the world. Chapter 7: Entertainment, Mass Media, and Urban Leisure. In the early 1900s, mass media like newspapers, magazines and newly introduced motion pictures played a growing role in Yokohama's cultural life. People read daily or weekly papers that covered not only politics and business but also human interest stories, tales of foreign lands, personal essays and serialized novels. The city's theaters hosted a blend of traditional kabuki and newer forms like shinpa, new school drama, sometimes featuring modern plots with Western costumes. Cinema fascinated many residents. Small theaters showed silent films from Europe or the United States, alongside homegrown Japanese shorts. A night at the cinema became a popular date or family outing for middle-class folks. Street performers continued in older districts, but the lure of electric lights and modern amusements drew crowds to the newly bright downtown, where cafes, sweet shops, and restaurants lined the streets. Some restaurants served Western dishes like beefsteak or custard pudding, while still offering local favorites like sushi and tempura. Sports also gained popularity. Baseball, introduced by American residents, picked up momentum among schools and youth clubs. Occasional matches in local fields drew curious onlookers wondering about this game of pitchers, batters, and home runs. The port also saw visiting naval crews who played friendly matches against Japanese teams, fostering informal cultural exchanges. For many Yokohama residents, these new forms of leisure brought excitement and a sense that the city was truly on par with Western capitals in entertainment and style. Chapter 8: Rising Social Consciousness and Labor Movements. With rapid industrial growth came social tensions. Factory workers in textile mills, shipyards, or metal workshops often toiled long hours under harsh conditions with minimal pay. Dock workers loading heavy cargo onto steamships risked accidents or sickness, as few safety regulations existed. Amid the city's glitter of modern wealth, some neighborhoods experienced poverty, cramped housing, and poor sanitation. By the early 1900s, some progressive thinkers and activists in Yokohama began discussing labor rights, forming small unions or mutual aid groups. New magazines that promoted social democracy or labor reforms found an audience among educated workers. Strikes occasionally broke out in certain mills demanding better wages or fewer work hours. While the Meiji government was cautious about letting workers organize freely, a growing undercurrent of social awareness took hold in Yokohama. Even some middle-class patrons sympathized, worried that extreme inequality could spark unrest. Women workers, especially in the silk and cotton industries, faced added hardships. They labored for many hours at spinning machines or looms, living in dormitories with strict rules. Social critics argued that Japan's modernization should not rest on the exploitation of young women or unskilled laborers. Some philanthropic or Christian mission groups in Yokohama ran outreach programs offering evening classes, small libraries, or basic health services for these laborers. While improvements came slowly, the seeds of workers' advocacy and social welfare were planted, forming part of Yokohama's evolving sense of community responsibility. Chapter 9: Earthquake Worries and Urban Vulnerabilities. Even as Yokohama advanced, earthquake hazards were never far from people's minds. The Kanto region had a long history of seismic events, and lighter quakes occasionally rocked the city, reminding everyone how fragile modern buildings could be. Many new structures were made of brick or stone, considered safer against fires but not always flexible enough for major tremors. Wooden houses, meanwhile, remained vulnerable to post-quake fires. City planners and some foreign architects suggested new codes, urging that buildings incorporate quake-resistant designs. A few forward-looking engineers experimented with reinforced concrete or special bracing methods, but comprehensive regulations were slow to appear, and many older buildings, especially in dense neighborhoods, remained shaky. Government funds mostly went to visible improvements in roads or harbor works, not seismic retrofitting. Popular newspapers ran articles warning about the Big One, a potential quake that could devastate the capital region. Public drills were minimal. Some families did keep emergency water buckets or homemade rescue tools, but broad emergency planning was lacking. Busy with trade, factories, and social changes, Yokohama pushed ahead, hoping that any serious quake was a distant threat. Unbeknownst to most, these vulnerabilities set the stage for a future disaster that would test the city's resilience to the core. Chapter 10: Yokohama's Dawn of the 20th Century. An emerging modern metropolis by the early 1910s, Yokohama stood tall as Japan's main gateway to the outside world. Steamships regularly sailed to Shanghai, Hong Kong, San Francisco, and Europe, bringing in goods and passengers, some of whom were tourists eager to see Japan's changing society. Bright electric lights lit main streets at night, and factories hummed with modern machines. The city's middle class enjoyed new leisure activities, from baseball matches to silent film showings. Meanwhile, workers pressed for better conditions, and local newspapers championed social reforms. Globally, Yokohama's success drew admiration, proving that Japan could adapt foreign ways while retaining a strong cultural identity. Yet cracks existed beneath the prosperous surface: inequalities between owners and laborers, insufficient quake readiness, and tensions over how rapidly Japanese society should westernize. The city's leadership tried to unify the push for progress while maintaining stability, forging a modern identity distinct from Tokyo or other ports. Citizens juggled old traditions with new influences, forging daily routines that merged tea ceremony grace with the clang of factory shifts. As the city continued to grow, bigger events loomed on the horizon. World wars, natural disasters, and the further expansions of Japan's empire would challenge Yokohama's spirit and shape its next chapters. Here, at the dawn of the 20th century, the city's mix of high ambition, global ties, and local pride set it apart, a vibrant urban center that looked outward to the seas and beyond, yet still carried the echoes of its fishing village past.
Part 4. Yokohama, in the early 20th century. Growth, Crisis and Renewal. Chapter 1. The Changing Cityscape. Taisho, Ambitions and Modern Lifestyles. By the early 1910s, Yokohama had become a booming gateway to Japan. Steamships lined the docks, warehouses bustled with goods, and the city streets came alive with new shops and nightlife. Under the Taisho era, 1912-1926, Japan sought further democracy and modernization, and Yokohama stood as a shining example of how international trade could reshape a coastal town into a bustling metropolis. Many residents, especially the middle class, welcomed these changes. They enjoyed new forms of urban entertainment: movie theaters showing silent films, cafes serving Western pastries, and places to see modern music or dance performances. Electric trams rattled through busy roads, carrying office workers in suits and students in updated school uniforms. Newspapers, printed in both Japanese and foreign languages, brought daily updates from around the globe, reinforcing Yokohama's status as a global city. Architecture also reflected the city's changing identity. More brick or concrete buildings replaced older wooden ones, aiming to reduce fire risk and appear modern. Some business owners requested Western-style designs with columns and tall windows, while others mixed Western and Japanese features in a single structure. This blend made Yokohama's cityscape unique. Along one street you might see a shop with sliding paper doors next to a brand new department store with a glass front display. Chapter 2. World War I. Effects and the post-war boom. When World War I, 1914-1918 erupted in Europe, Japan joined on the side of the Allies. Although the main battles happened far away, Yokohama felt the conflict's impact. Japanese factories increased production of war supplies and goods once sourced from Europe. This caused a temporary economic surge. Shipyards launched more vessels, and local producers shipped items like textiles or tools to Allied nations. Throughout the war, Yokohama's port saw an uptick in shipping traffic. Some foreign nationals returned home due to the chaos in Europe, but others found new opportunities as Japan filled supply gaps. After the war ended, Japan emerged stronger in global markets, with Yokohama reaping benefits as the prime export hub for Japan's raw silk, tea, and other products. A wave of prosperity followed, fueling optimism that the city's growth would continue unhindered. Yet the war also brought international tensions. Some foreigners in Yokohama came from nations on opposing sides, creating awkwardness in social clubs or trade associations. Meanwhile, returning Japanese soldiers carried fresh views of the outside world, occasionally challenging old hierarchies. The city's youth became more curious about Western political ideas, like democracy and labor rights, and local newspapers fed that curiosity with stories of revolutions and social changes abroad. Chapter 3. Rising social awareness and political movements following World War I. Global attitudes about labor rights, women's roles, and universal suffrage began trickling into Japan more strongly. In Yokohama, this led to a steady rise in political clubs, labor unions, and magazines discussing new ideals, some promoting socialism or liberal democracy, others advocating moderate reforms. Meetings often took place in small halls near the harbor or in second-floor rooms above bustling cafes. The city's emerging middle class, clerks, teachers, shop owners grew more vocal about local governance. They pushed for better roads, public health measures and expanded schooling. Some ward assemblies started including younger citizens or those with forward-thinking ideas. Women's groups formed study circles where they read Western feminist works, discussed voting rights, and explored ways to balance modern jobs with family duties. However, these developments sometimes clashed with more conservative forces who feared rapid change could erode traditional values. Police monitored gatherings that hinted at socialism or anarchism, and authorities occasionally shut down radical newspapers. Yet overall, Yokohama's open, international atmosphere meant that fresh ideas found a more welcoming home than in some other regions. Locals were used to cross-cultural exchanges and recognized that modern thinking might help them remain competitive on the world stage. Chapter 4: The Great Kanto Earthquake. Sudden destruction. On September 1st, 1923, around noon, a massive earthquake struck the Kanto region, including Tokyo and Yokohama. Known as the Great Kanto Earthquake, it measured an estimated magnitude of 7.9. In Yokohama, the quake's force caused buildings to collapse instantly, splitting roads and bringing down telephone poles. Fires broke out in many places because people were cooking lunch at the time, and broken gas lines fueled firestorms that raced through the city's dense neighborhoods. Within hours, much of Yokohama lay in ruins. Wooden homes and shops burned to the ground, while even some newer brick structures crumbled under the quake or fell victim to uncontrollable flames. The port area saw warehouses flattened, and ships in the harbor rocked violently, some colliding with piers. Thousands of people tried to flee down narrow streets already choked with debris. Broken water mains left firefighters unable to stop raging fires, leading to scenes of chaos and heartbreak. Casualties were staggering, and many survivors found themselves homeless overnight. Makeshift camps formed in open fields or along the bay's edge, where refugees sought shelter with little more than blankets or tarps. Major roads and rail lines were severely damaged, cutting off supplies and rescue efforts. Communication lines fell silent, leaving families in despair over missing loved ones. Foreign residents and Japanese citizens alike suffered side by side, forging a sense of shared tragedy amid confusion and loss. Chapter 5: Emergency Relief, Community Spirit and Blame. In the earthquake's immediate aftermath, local and national authorities struggled to organize relief. The central government sent troops and supplies, but roads were blocked and many official buildings had collapsed. In Yokohama, community spirit emerged strongly as neighbors helped dig survivors out of rubble, pooled food, and converted parks or temple grounds into communal kitchens. Foreign consulates and businesses offered medical aid, setting up temporary clinics for both their citizens and any Japanese in need. However, fear and rumors spread quickly. Some segments of the population unfairly blamed certain minority groups for starting fires or looting, leading to panic and violence in the quake's chaotic days. The tragedy exposed how fragile society could be when essential services vanished. Despite some ugly incidents, many volunteers, both Japanese and foreign, worked tirelessly to bring calm. International charities also pitched in, sending medical supplies and funds. These combined efforts, though, could not erase the enormous pain suffered by the city. Civil engineers and architects hurried to assess the damage. They noted that older wooden districts burned completely, while some modern structures had partial collapse or heavy cracks. Earthquake experts pointed out the region's geological faults and the urgent need for quake-resistant construction. But in the swirl of immediate rescue, it was hard to plan for the future. People were too busy trying to survive the present crisis. Chapter 6: Rebuilding the Ruins. The reconstruction plan. Despite the heartbreak, Yokohama's leadership wasted little time starting reconstruction. City officials, along with the national government, wanted to rebuild a safer, more modern Yokohama, one that could stand up to future quakes and fires. Urban planners proposed wider streets and more open public spaces to act as fire breaks. They championed the use of steel-framed buildings or reinforced concrete for new structures. Funding was a huge challenge. Some relief money came from the government, but much had to be borrowed from banks,
which were cautious after seeing the quake's devastation. International donors contributed to relief but rarely financed massive rebuilding. Local entrepreneurs and property owners debated how to pay for better design and materials, while many everyday people simply tried to piece their lives back together, living in tents or temporary shelters. Rail lines had to be restored, and the harbor needed major repairs to handle cargo ships again. Skilled workers from all over Japan came to Yokohama to earn decent wages in construction. Neighborhood committees organized themselves, cooperating in large-scale cleanups. They cleared rubble, rebuilt small shrines or schools, and replaced essential water lines. While official plans sometimes got bogged down in bureaucracy, the core driving force was citizens' determination to see Yokohama thrive once more. Slowly, brick by brick, street by street, the city emerged from the ashes with a new layout that aimed for resilience. Chapter 7: New businesses and industrial growth. The mid-1920s through the early 1930s brought a wave of economic renewal to Yokohama. Once the basic reconstruction was underway, new factories, warehouses and offices took shape. Some companies specialized in textiles or shipbuilding, others in importing foreign technology for local assembly. With electric power generation expanded, more industries found Yokohama an ideal base to produce goods. At the same time, trade resumed at the port, shipping out silk, tea and manufactured products, while receiving Western machinery, chemicals and raw materials. A portion of the local population gained better jobs, working in modern factories with improved wages though still modest by international standards. Skilled laborers could find stable employment in shipyards or mechanical plants. White-collar staff, like accountants and clerks, joined growing commercial firms or shipping companies. The city's middle class continued expanding, fueling demand for department stores, cafes, and new forms of entertainment. Yet not everyone benefited equally. Many laborers lived in cramped apartments, especially in districts that were cheaply rebuilt after the earthquake. Some companies tried to adopt labor welfare practices offering limited health coverage or simple dormitories for workers, but others stuck to old methods, letting employees toil long hours under strict discipline. Labor unions still faced suspicion from authorities who worried about socialist or communist influences. Despite these tensions, the general mood was one of productivity and forward motion, as Yokohama sought to reclaim its spot as Japan's #1 port city. Chapter 8: Cultural Renaissance. Music, movies and more. Alongside industrial recovery, Yokohama experienced a cultural renaissance. This was partly due to the city's international heritage. Foreign residents, though fewer in number after the quake, still organized clubs, music concerts and sports events. Meanwhile, Japanese artists, writers and musicians found fresh inspiration in the city's rebuilt neighborhoods and its vibrant blend of East and West. Movie houses showed the latest silent films, and eventually introduced talkies movies with sound, drawing large audiences eager for excitement. The city's music scene diversified, featuring both classical Japanese performances and Western orchestras or jazz bands. Dance halls became trendy spots for young men and women, dancing foxtrots or tangos, sometimes shocking older generations. Bookstores sold translations of foreign novels, Western love stories, detective tales or political essays which stimulated local writers to try new styles. Restaurants and cafes sprang up, offering curry rice, British-style afternoon tea, or American sandwiches. Street vendors sold sweet pastries influenced by French or German recipes. On festival days, you might see a mix paper lanterns and taiko drums accompanied by swirling Western-style waltz tunes in the background. This lively cross-cultural energy, unique to Yokohama, shaped the city's sense of identity as a place open to global currents yet proud of its own traditions. Chapter 9: The storm clouds gather. Economic downturn and political shifts. Despite its successes, the late 1920s and early 1930s saw global economic trouble strike Japan. The Great Depression, which began in the United States, led to collapsing markets worldwide. For Yokohama, a slump in export demand meant fewer ships and layoffs in factories. Silk prices fell sharply, hurting rural producers and the city's merchants. Some local banks struggled, and a few even failed, causing fear among depositors. Political mood across Japan grew more militaristic, as some factions of the army gained power by claiming foreign expansion could solve economic woes. This shift disturbed many of Yokohama's liberal thinkers, who worried that a push for empire might lead to war. Yet others, especially those with nationalistic sentiments, supported the idea that Japan should secure more resources overseas. In Yokohama's dockside bars and offices, debates raged: was aggression in Asia a path to economic recovery, or a risk of deeper conflict? Unemployment rose among dock workers and new graduates, creating tension in the streets. Occasional protests demanded government help. Police kept close watch on union meetings, sometimes shutting them down. Nevertheless, the city pressed on, with businesses hoping for a turnaround. Some took advantage of the slump by investing in cheaper land or labor, positioning themselves for a rebound. In the background, political shifts at the national level hinted that Japan might soon embark on a more aggressive foreign policy, with uncertain consequences for Yokohama's international trade connections. Chapter 10. Between recovery and approaching strife. Yokohama. On the eve of change by the mid-1930s, Yokohama's reconstruction from the Great Kanto earthquake was mostly complete. Wide avenues, stronger buildings, and modern infrastructure signaled a city ready to face the future. Factories hummed, shipping lines carried goods to distant ports, and cultural life remained vibrant. Many residents, old and young, enjoyed modern conveniences: electric lights, radio broadcasts, newspapers that arrived daily with both domestic and foreign news. Shoppers strolled down bustling main streets, lined with department stores and small boutiques. Yet, dark undercurrents lay beneath this progress. Japan's growing militarism suggested that the country might soon be at odds with Western powers, threatening Yokohama's long-standing foreign networks. The global economy remained fragile, and some city dwellers still struggled in cramped housing or precarious work. Even so, optimism lingered. The city had survived an earthquake and weathered economic turmoil. Why not keep going strong? This sense of uneasy hope set the stage for the next phase of Yokohama's story. As war clouds formed in the late 1930s, the city would face new challenges that tested its resilience even more severely. But for now, in the mid-1930s, Yokohama stood at a balance point, a proud internationally minded city, forging ahead despite the gathering storms both at home and abroad.
Part 5. Yokohama from the late 1930s through World War II, conflict, hardship, and pathways to survival. Chapter 1. Storm clouds gathering. Yokohama's tense mid-1930. By the middle of the 1930s, Yokohama was in many ways a modern Japanese city. It had busy shipyards, factory districts, and bright main streets, with shops selling both Japanese and Western-style goods. Its population had recovered from the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, and there was a sense of renewed energy as people went about their daily routines, working in offices, running cafes, or loading cargo at the docks. Yet, a growing dark mood lay beneath this normalcy. Across Japan, militarism was on the rise. Many in government and the army felt that expanding Japan's territory would solve economic woes and secure vital resources. Although Yokohama had always been open to the world, hosting foreign businesses and cultural influences, the new political climate made life uneasy. National propaganda told citizens to prepare for possible conflict. The Japanese army's campaign in China intensified, and rumors of further expansion were everywhere. Even those who enjoyed Western music or fashion in Yokohama's lively neighborhoods noticed that some foreign-run shops were closing, and certain foreigners were leaving Japan entirely because they sensed trouble ahead. Meanwhile, newspapers grew more cautious in their reporting, often praising Japan's overseas actions and limiting open debate about the future. Popular media encouraged loyalty to the emperor and country, portraying dissent as disloyal. In Yokohama's cafes and small bars, people whispered about the possibility of war with Western powers, but few wanted to speak too loudly for fear of being labeled unpatriotic. The city's role as a major seaport meant it was likely to be a strategic target if an international war broke out, a fact that weighed heavily on those who remembered the devastation from the 1923 quake. Even so, daily life carried on for the time being, with shopkeepers hoping the city would remain a center for trade rather than battle. Factories near the docks adapted to the growing conflict by shifting production. Some made uniforms, boots or parts for vehicles used by soldiers. Others manufactured steel plates or smaller items that could be used in weaponry. Dock workers noticed an uptick in crates marked for military shipments. Although many local people were uneasy, they hoped that if a real war broke out, it would be short. Others, especially younger men, answered calls to volunteer for military service, believing they were doing their duty to defend Japan's interests. Housing and daily necessities were not yet scarce, but signs of a tightening economy showed up in subtle ways. The government introduced small rationing measures for certain goods, and families were encouraged to be thrifty. Politicians gave speeches urging unity and sacrifice for the good of the nation. In the background, Yokohama's famed cultural diversity began to shrink as tensions with the West deepened, making everyday interactions with foreign residents more strained or even suspicious. Chapter 2: Stepping into the Abyss, the Sino-Japanese War, and Yokohama's new role. In 1937, open conflict erupted in China, leading to the Second Sino-Japanese War. This development drastically changed Yokohama's character. The city, long known for its commercial exchange, now found its port increasingly directed towards supporting military operations. Factories that once made civilian goods pivoted to producing army supplies, like specialized fabrics for uniforms, metal components for vehicles, and even canned food. Shipyards repaired warships or outfitted transport vessels to carry troops and material. Yokohama's ties to China took on a grim edge. For decades, Chinese merchants and families had lived in the city, operating shops and restaurants in lively districts. But as the war intensified, many Chinese residents found themselves under suspicion. Some were forced to leave, while others tried to keep a low profile. Anti-Chinese sentiment rose in certain corners of Yokohama, though not everyone shared these hostile views. Some longtime Japanese neighbors helped protect Chinese friends, but the climate of fear and surveillance made it difficult for them to interact freely. Street life grew more subdued. Posters declared that every citizen should help Japan's cause. Housewives joined neighborhood associations to gather scrap metal or donate valuables for military use. Schools, too, adjusted curriculums, teaching students the importance of national unity and the righteousness of Japan's campaign in Asia. Local newspapers ran heroic stories of soldiers in distant battlefields, rarely mentioning heavy losses. Cinemas showed patriotic newsreels before the main features, praising the army's triumphs. For ordinary Yokohama residents, daily reality was that many of their goods, rice, sugar, cloth, were either more expensive or in shorter supply. The government introduced ration books for some items, controlling how much each household could buy. Lines at shops occasionally formed, and bartering among neighbors became more common. Meanwhile, the city's once thriving foreign community shrank. Some Western businesses closed, and certain European or American residents packed up to leave, guessing that war would likely spread. Yet Yokohama's trains and trams still ran, carrying workers to factories at dawn, returning them at dusk. Families kept up small traditions, like weekend strolls in the local park or gatherings at shrines for seasonal festivals, trying to maintain normalcy. Beneath the surface, anxiety rippled. People wondered if the war in China would expand, and if Yokohama's bay might one day see enemy ships or bombers overhead. Chapter 3: Japan's Wider War and Mounting Pressures at Home. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 plunged the nation into a broader conflict, known internationally as World War II. For Yokohama, this meant a sudden break with American and British trade, cutting off supplies once easily purchased from those countries. Allied shipping that used to bring foreign goods vanished, replaced by Japan's own war transports. The Allies blockaded shipping routes, making raw materials like oil increasingly rare. Even everyday items, such as cooking oil, leather, or soap, grew scarce. Rationing became a central part of life. Households received ration coupons for staples such as rice, salt, sugar, and even clothes. Long queues formed outside shops when rumors spread about a fresh delivery of vegetables or fish. Homemade remedies became more common. People made their own soap or used alternative grains instead of white rice. The government encouraged families to grow small victory gardens in any available yard space, hoping to boost food production. Schools and community groups taught children how to preserve food and sew patches on old clothes, reinforcing the theme of national sacrifice. Factories in Yokohama now operated almost fully for the war effort. They produced steel plates for ships, mechanical parts for planes, or ammunition casings. Workers, including many women who replaced men drafted into the military, labored long hours, sometimes in unsafe conditions. Overworked and underfed, they pressed on, spurred by official slogans to give their best for Japan. Management often stressed discipline. Being late or complaining about conditions could be seen as disloyal. Meanwhile, bombs or sabotage felt like distant threats, though the government told cities to brace for possible Allied air raids. Morale was carefully managed. Radio broadcasts spoke of victories and heroic soldiers, rarely mentioning defeats. Entertainment that did exist, like local theater or variety shows, leaned heavily on patriotic music and references to glorious battles. Yet in private, especially if reading between the lines of vague war updates, some citizens suspected things were not going well. Ship arrivals from the Pacific diminished, and occasional glimpses of wounded soldiers returning to the port hinted at heavier fighting than official propaganda admitted. Chapter 4: Creeping Reality. Air raid drills and defensive measures. By 1943, Yokohama's authorities organized air raid drills almost weekly. Sirens would blare, and households had to shut off lights, quickly find shelter. Neighborhood wardens checked each street to ensure blackouts were complete. No glimmer of light that might guide enemy bombers. Mothers and children learned to grab emergency bags containing water, bandages, and a little food. Schools practiced huddling under desks or running to underground shelters if they had them. Many older wooden buildings, especially in tight alleyways, were seen as potential tinder if bombs struck. Fire brigades were understaffed, as more men had been called to the front. Volunteers, often older folks or young women, were trained in simple firefighting, using buckets or small pumps. The city set up open areas as designated safety zones where civilians could flee if bombs set large sections ablaze. Some families dug modest shelters in their yards or under floors, though these gave limited protection if a heavy raid occurred. Rumors circulated that the Allies had advanced, more powerful aircraft than ever. Locals sometimes glimpsed a lone Allied plane on a high-altitude reconnaissance flight, prompting sirens but no actual bombing. People found false confidence in these minor incidents, hoping that the Allies might not bother hitting their city hard. Others remembered how quickly firestorms had destroyed Tokyo or other areas, feeling that Yokohama was living on borrowed time. Tensions among neighbors sometimes rose. If a person voiced doubts about the war, they might be reported to police. Official watchers patrolled night lights and conversation, urging everyone to stay loyal. At the same time, families with men in the military carried on with quiet pride, posting pictures of uniformed sons on home altars and hoping for safe returns. The stage was set for a confrontation with Allied forces that many dreaded but felt powerless to stop. Chapter 5: The Approach of Total War. Crumbling supply lines. The Allies' island-hopping campaign in the Pacific cut off many of Japan's vital supply routes. By 1944, shortages became dire in Yokohama. Factories, lacking raw materials like iron ore or rubber, had to slow production or shut down lines. More workers were laid off, and job hunts turned fruitless, leaving entire families scraping by on meager rations. Basic healthcare also weakened. Hospitals missed crucial medicines, and some doctors joined the front or struggled to keep clinics running. Black markets emerged. Certain unscrupulous dealers sold rice or sugar at exorbitant prices to those desperate enough to pay. People lined up for hours hoping to buy scraps,
Government officials cracked down on hoarding or illegal trades but couldn't fully stop them. The city's powerless were especially at risk single mothers, the elderly, or large families with no stable income. Scenes of malnourishment or fainting in ration lines became more frequent. The harbor, once brimming with global commerce, looked nearly empty. Now mostly battered cargo vessels or naval ships used the port. The Allied blockade made it tough for fresh supplies to arrive from overseas territories. Local fishing, too, produced less catch, as some fishing boats had been commandeered or lacked fuel. Rail lines from inland farmland brought fewer crops, partly because farmland itself was losing men to conscription. Even local produce faced growing demand from other cities in dire need. Propaganda still trumpeted potential victory, yet any observer could see the war's toll on everyday life. Quiet murmurs wondered if the Allies might soon bomb or even invade. High-level rumors indicated Allied bombers had begun striking major Japanese cities. Yokohama's people tried to remain composed, but many recognized the city's large port and industrial base made it a prime target. Chapter 6. The raids begin. Fire and destruction rained down by early 1945. Allied bombers launched heavier attacks on key Japanese urban centers. Yokohama experienced smaller raids initially, perhaps a few bombers dropping incendiaries, causing localized fires. Each time the sirens wailed, residents scrambled into shelters, hearts pounding. Some bombs hit port facilities, damaging warehouses and piers. Fire crews did their best, but water pressure was weak, and roads were cratered or blocked by rubble. Then on May 29, 1945, came a massive Allied bombing assault. Hundreds of B-29 bombers flew over Yokohama, dropping large numbers of incendiary bombs. Entire neighborhoods, especially older ones with wooden houses, ignited swiftly. Flames leapt from roof to roof, forming devastating firestorms. Smoke and intense heat trapped people in narrow alleys. Families fled carrying only small bundles or ration kits. The city's firefighting resources were quickly overwhelmed by the scale of burning. In less than a day, a huge swath of Yokohama lay in ruins. Factories, offices, schools, and thousands of homes reduced to ash. Dock areas were gutted, ships set ablaze or sunk. Survivors stumbled through charred streets in shock, searching for missing relatives or friends. Some took shelter in half-collapsed train tunnels or along the bay's edge, where the water offered some relief from the blistering heat. Even large modern buildings with steel frames often lost interiors to unstoppable fires. Hospitals overflowed with burn victims, many forced to lie on mats in open courtyards, short on bandages and medicine. Night fell over a city glowing red with embers, the air thick with acrid smoke. Survivors told stories of entire families lost, of chaotic escapes, of friends making last-ditch climbs onto small boats along the waterfront. In the wake of this single raid, Yokohama's spirit sank under grief. Yet the air raids did not end there. Further bombing in June and July battered what remained, leaving the city on the brink of total devastation. Chapter 7. Total collapse. Summer of 1945. Following these catastrophic bombings, Yokohama struggled to function at even a basic level. Food distribution nearly halted, as many stores and supply depots were obliterated. Refugees from the worst-hit districts pitched makeshift tents wherever they found clear ground, temple courtyards, schools that survived, or riverbanks. Broken water lines meant thirst and unsanitary conditions, raising the risk of disease. The war front's news was grim, with Japan losing key battles in the Pacific. Allied ships and submarines controlled sea routes, strangling Japan's last lines for raw materials. Hunger deepened. Many children went barefoot, their clothes in tatters. Older folks recalled hardships from the Great Kanto earthquake, but that disaster had been natural and relatively local. Now the entire country was caught in a war with no simple recovery in sight. Government instructions told people to prepare for a possible Allied invasion on the home islands. Some local officials urged civilians to form national defense units, gathering farm tools or bamboo spears as last-ditch weapons. Rumors swirled that if an invasion came, families should be ready to burn their own houses to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Morale was near breaking point. though official propaganda still called for perseverance. All around Yokohama, life was reduced to day-to-day survival. Families foraged for bits of food in fields or among the ruined gardens. A few found help from farmers outside the city, who smuggled grains or root vegetables. Factories that could still operate were forced to produce small items for the army or navy, but air raids kept workers in constant fear. Meanwhile, the Allies pushed closer to Japan's mainland, launching more frequent bombings on major cities, including further hits on Yokohama. Chapter 8: War's End, Surrender and Occupation Arrive. August 1945 changed everything. On August 6th, an atomic bomb devastated Hiroshima. Then on August 9th, another bomb hit Nagasaki. Shock and confusion spread across Japan, including the battered remains of Yokohama. Even though the city was already in ruins, these atomic bombings signaled a horrific new level of destruction. Many in Yokohama realized the war was truly lost. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on a radio broadcast. Citizens gathered around a few functional speakers to hear his solemn voice, telling them the war had ended. In early September, Allied occupation forces landed in Japan, quickly making their way to Tokyo and Yokohama. The city became a major entry point for thousands of American soldiers. They found a scene of utter devastation: entire city blocks flattened, port facilities barely functional, and countless homeless survivors living in burnt-out shells or flimsy shacks. Some Allied troops took over schools or office buildings that still stood, using them as headquarters or barracks. For locals, the arrival of foreign soldiers was both a relief. The bombings had stopped, and a shock. Many worried about how the occupiers would treat them, but Allied command introduced relief programs aimed at preventing mass starvation. Food rations arrived by ship, including wheat flour and canned goods alien to most Japanese. Lines for these handouts were massive, with some families walking long distances across rubble-strewn roads to reach distribution points. Though the immediate violence had ended, the challenge of day-to-day existence remained. Water was still scarce, and much of Yokohama's infrastructure was destroyed. The new Allied administrators promised reconstruction and reforms, but those processes would require time, labor, and materials that Japan sorely lacked after years of war and blockade. Most families focused on survival tasks, building improvised shelters, gathering water from communal pumps, and salvaging anything from the ruins to trade or reuse. Chapter 9: Picking Up the Pieces. First Steps of Recovery. In the months following surrender, Yokohama's battered population took stock of the city's condition. Many places once thronged with cargo or lively businesses lay in twisted wreckage. Street after street showed only the outlines of where houses stood, with a few crumbling walls or a lone chimney marking the spot. Commuter rails were partially destroyed, so large numbers of workers trudged by foot to find what work remained in city offices or at dock areas under Allied supervision. Allied occupation rules restricted travel at times, issued new regulations on property usage, and assigned tasks to local officials. Some large buildings were seized for the occupying forces' own use. This meant that local government offices had to move into smaller temporary quarters. The occupation also introduced or reinforced certain democratic reforms, encouraging local assemblies to meet openly, trying to root out lingering militaristic influences, and supporting free expression in newspapers, though censorship of topics related to the war's final campaign sometimes remained. With survival needs pressing, many residents formed volunteer squads to clear rubble, gather salvageable bricks, or fill bomb craters in roads. Fishermen who still had boats tried to repair them for coastal fishing, providing much-needed fresh protein. The city's ancient community spirit came to the fore. Neighbors who barely knew each other before worked side by side to fix water pipes or rebuild a small corner store. Some laborers found employment in Allied-run repair projects, receiving ration tickets or pay that helped their families get by. Schools slowly reopened, often in half-ruined buildings or shared spaces. Teachers used new textbooks that avoided the militarist content of the war years. Children learned about democracy, peace, and the world beyond Japan's borders. Though the environment was rough, these first steps of recovery planted seeds of hope that Yokohama could re-emerge as a thriving place. Chapter 10: balancing loss and a glimmer of hope. Yokohama's post-war transition. By late 1945 and into 1946, Yokohama stood at a crossroad between the raw wound of war's destruction and the faint light of rebirth. The port, once a proud commercial gateway, was a partial skeleton of cranes and wrecked piers. However, with Allied shipments of supplies coming in, it also served as a funnel for rebuilding materials, clothing and food aid. Mixed in with sorrow and fatigue was a determination to make the city live again. Families returned from rural evacuation or from bomb shelters, picking through rubble for personal mementos, a teacup, a picture, or a metal pot that survived. Some discovered old neighborhood ties remained intact, a local temple priest opening the courtyard for communal cooking, a hairdresser offering free haircuts under a half-collapsed roof. Meanwhile, new faces appeared, people from other bombed-out cities searching for relatives or hoping to find slightly better conditions in Yokohama's harbor zone. The Allied occupation encouraged local industries to restart as soon as possible, believing economic revival would keep social unrest in check. Machinery was shipped in to help fix broken factories. Skilled laborers from the docks or shipyards spent long hours repairing or refitting equipment, though supply lines were still messy. Black markets flourished, offering stolen Allied provisions or black market rice at steep costs. Police tried to contain this but recognized that many were desperate. Step by step, the city's scattered business community found small ways to function, like a dock firm that specialized in simple cargo loading, or a printing press that focused on local notices. Yokohama's identity, once heavily tied to global commerce and cultural openness, had been darkened by war, yet even under rubble, the spirit of resilience endured. Parents taught children not to give up, pointing to new opportunities the future might hold under peace. As families lit small lanterns in their battered homes and Allied trucks rumbled by with relief goods, a cautious optimism flickered. The city had weathered the Great Kanto earthquake 2 decades earlier, and now it had survived a world war's devastation. If it could stand up yet again, perhaps it would reclaim and surpass its old glory, just in a different world context.
Part 6. Yokohama's post-war revival, rebuilding, economic growth, and social changes. Chapter 1. From Ruins to Hope. The early occupation years, later 1940s, when World War II ended in August 1945, Yokohama lay devastated by heavy bombing. Allied occupation forces arrived soon after, taking control of key facilities. Much of the city's port zone was in ruins, with twisted metal, collapsed warehouses, and charred piers. Thousands of residents were homeless, living in makeshift shelters around parks and temple courtyards. Basic supplies, food, clothing, medicine, were extremely scarce. The sight of foreign soldiers patrolling the streets, handing out some relief rations, marked a big shift for local people, who until then had known a highly militarized and nationalistic Japan. Despite the sorrow and shock, small signs of hope appeared. Allied relief programs distributed wheat flour, canned foods, blankets, and other essentials to prevent widespread famine. Local officials, working with occupation authorities, cleared roads and reconnected vital services. Schools reopened in partly damaged buildings, teaching new democratic principles and removing militarist lessons from textbooks. Families often pooled resources, sharing cooking stoves or leftover materials to rebuild tiny living spaces. Economic activity limped along, with some factories salvaging what they could to produce goods for daily life, like pots, pans, or simple textiles. Meanwhile, black markets thrived. Hidden stalls sold items looted from wreckage or smuggled from Allied stockpiles, usually at high prices. Job scarcity was a major concern. Many men had died in the war or returned injured, limiting their ability to work. Women increasingly took on new roles, whether in office positions, street vending, or small manufacturing. A sense of communal spirit kept neighborhoods going. People formed volunteer squads to remove rubble, repair water pipes, and scavenge building materials. Whenever an old factory or warehouse corner could be salvaged, local entrepreneurs tried turning it into a workshop or store. aiming to spark even the smallest recovery. Slowly, each day brought incremental improvements, but it was clear that Yokohama's journey back to life would take years, requiring unity and grit from everyone. Chapter 2: Occupation Policies and the Path to Reconstruction. Later 1940s, early 1950s. The Allied occupation, led mostly by American forces, aimed to demilitarize Japan and create conditions for democratic governance. Yokohama, close to Tokyo, became a prime location for occupation command offices. Soldiers and officers used surviving big buildings for headquarters, while local families were sometimes asked to vacate homes if the occupying forces needed them. This was frustrating, but many understood it as part of the post-war reality. New regulations guided city planning, labor practices, and land reform. The government introduced or reinforced labor rights, letting workers form unions and bargain collectively. Although many factories were still damaged, these reforms planted seeds for fairer working conditions later. The occupation also broke up certain large corporations believed to have fueled wartime production. Smaller businesses, starved for resources, tried to regroup under more flexible rules, hoping foreign trade would one day resume at Yokohama's port. To jumpstart the economy, occupation authorities supported some infrastructure repairs. Crews fixed roads and rail lines, letting goods move more freely. Electricity and water were partially restored in main districts, though many side streets remained dark. The port itself saw Allied supply ships arriving with building materials, relief grain, and vehicles. Stevedores dock workers returned to cargo handling jobs, albeit under foreign supervision, sometimes wearing hand-me-down uniforms from Allied stock. Slowly, new workshops or distribution hubs opened near the quays, employing local labor in tasks like sorting foreign aid packages or unloading shipments. Meanwhile, democracy lessons filtered into daily life. Neighborhood councils met openly to discuss local problems such as trash clearance or communal cooking facilities. Women who had been major contributors to the war effort were now encouraged by Allied edicts to participate more in local decision-making. Some wards elected female representatives for the first time, a major shift from the male-dominated politics of the past. Still, not everyone was ready for these changes. Traditionalists felt uneasy about the speed of reforms, while progressive-minded youths wanted even bolder steps toward freedoms. Through it all, Yokohama's battered streets slowly regained a pulse of normalcy. Chapter 3: A New Horizon, the San Francisco Treaty and the Return of Sovereignty. Early 1950s. In 1951, Japan signed the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which formally ended the Allied occupation in 1952. For Yokohama, this moment brought a sense of pride. Japan was regaining independence, free to govern itself again. Yet the city was still deeply scarred, physically and economically. Although the official occupation ended, US bases and troops remained in certain areas. Over time, the Allies released more properties back to local authorities, allowing the city to expand commercial use of port land or old factory sites. Trade began to pick up as Japan's new government forged deals to export light goods and textiles in exchange for raw materials. Yokohama, historically a trade portal, threw energy into rebuilding wharves, installing modern cranes, and standardizing cargo handling. Shipping lines, some reactivated from pre-war days, reappeared with improved vessels. Engineers devised better pier layouts to accommodate bigger, faster ships. For local business owners, the dream was that Yokohama's port would again be a leading gateway for Japan's booming exports. Domestic life also rebounded. Small factories resumed making textiles, household electronics, and basic machinery, often in newly constructed industrial parks near the water. Employers needed labor, so job postings appeared, especially for youth and women. Wages were still modest, but it was a step up from the chaos right after the war. Department stores reopened or were rebuilt, showcasing an emerging variety of consumer goods, some Western-inspired, others purely Japanese. People felt Japan was on the verge of an economic miracle if they worked hard and followed the new democratic path. Entertainment also thrived. Neighborhood movie houses showed both Hollywood films and local productions, capturing imaginations with romances or historical dramas. Music fans could hear jazz, pop, and traditional enka performed in small clubs or larger auditoriums. Food supplies improved, so families could once again enjoy fresh fish, seasonal produce, and sweet treats. Though rationing had mostly ended, some items remained pricey. Nonetheless, the city's morale lifted with each sign that normal life was possible again. Chapter 4: The Economic Boom. Yokohama and Japan's post-war miracle, mid-1950s. By the mid-1950s, Japan's post-war economic miracle was taking shape, fueled by a mix of US aid, global demand for Japanese products, and domestic reforms. Yokohama, with its port proximity, became a central hub for exporting textiles, electronics, and later, vehicles. Factories soared in production, offering thousands of jobs. Neighborhoods once ruined by bombs sprouted new office buildings, while commercial districts revived with bright neon signs promoting local brands. Foreign investment returned in modest amounts, as Western companies recognized Japan's stable new market. Some reopened local branches or factories in the outskirts of Yokohama, focusing on consumer goods. Local shipping firms modernized fleets, adopting advanced cargo handling methods such as containerization. Dock workers, once reliant on muscle to load crates, began training on new machines and forklift technology. This improved efficiency, lowered shipping costs, and attracted more global freight lines. With increased prosperity, people spent on durables like radios, sewing machines, and bicycles. Over time, the city introduced better public transportation, extending bus routes to suburban areas. Families who had lived in cramped shelters post-war moved into small but sturdier homes. Schools expanded, often adopting newer teaching methods that combined traditional values with scientific and technical subjects relevant to the growing economy. In fact, many youths from other prefectures migrated to Yokohama, lured by job prospects in factories or shipping firms. Despite the positive turn, inequalities persisted. Some laborers earned decent wages in unionized workplaces, while others in smaller factories remained underpaid with few benefits. Housing shortages forced many to occupy old wooden barracks or hastily built apartments. Polluted air and water from factories affected poorer districts. Over time, labor unions pressured companies for better working conditions, and environmental activists questioned unregulated factory emissions. Still, the general public mood was that Yokohama was on the rise, forging a new chapter of strength and global trade significance. Chapter 5: Rising Urban Infrastructure, Roads, Rails, and Modernizing the Port, late 1950s. As Japan's economy took off, Yokohama's leaders advanced major infrastructure projects to handle the surging population and cargo flows. They widened roads, creating better links to Tokyo and neighboring industrial zones. Elevated highways and new bridges helped alleviate growing traffic jams. Passenger rail networks expanded beyond the main line to Tokyo, adding suburban spurs that let commuter towns flourish outside Yokohama's center. This rail expansion was crucial for the city's workforce, providing cheaper and faster commutes. The port underwent even more modernization. Container shipping, then an emerging global trend, promised to streamline how goods were loaded and unloaded. Yokohama's harbor authority built specialized container terminals with massive cranes. Though the technology took time to perfect, the city recognized that adopting such methods would keep it competitive among world ports. Oil refineries and petrochemical plants also sprouted around the bay, fueling new industries but raising environmental questions. Urban planners strove to strike a balance between industry and living spaces. They carved out zoning regulations, industrial sections near the waterfront, residential zones further inland, and commercial districts around major rail hubs. Official guidelines promoted earthquake-resistant construction, remembering the 1923 quake. Modern building codes required reinforced concrete or steel frames, plus better fire safety measures. Bit by bit, Yokohama's skyline emerged from post-war rubble into a mid-century modern silhouette of high-rise offices, factories with tall chimneys, and freshly built apartment towers. Yet, the city's growth also caused crowding.
Migrants from rural prefectures arrived weekly, seeking city wages, and many ended up in cramped lodgings. Some communities in older wards lacked green spaces or faced flooding from poor drainage. With the economy booming, officials sometimes neglected these social needs in favor of industrial expansion. Nonetheless, consumer goods multiplied, allowing families to purchase electric fans, televisions, and refrigerators, transforming domestic life and freeing women from certain household chores. Yokohama advanced, but new challenges lay just beneath the surface. Chapter 6: Shifts in Social Life, Entertainment, Youth Culture, and Gender Roles. 1960s. By the 1960s, Yokohama's post-war children had grown into a new generation, shaped by radio, television, and better schooling. Teenagers craved fresh forms of entertainment. Pop music, jazz clubs, and Western rock tunes gained popularity, especially near base areas where American soldiers or sailors sometimes introduced new dance styles. Youths formed bands, performed in local halls, and bought records of the Beatles or local Japanese pop idols. This youthful energy spilled into daily fashions, with girls wearing mini skirts or mixing Japanese garments with Western accessories. For older folks, the city offered a variety of amusements: movie theaters showing both domestic and foreign films, sporting events like baseball, and nighttime neon districts where restaurants and bars catered to busy office workers. Families ventured out on weekends to newly refurbished parks or small amusement spots around the waterfront. Department stores staged sales showcasing modern appliances, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, electric rice cookers, items that promised a more comfortable middle-class life. Women's roles also slowly evolved. The booming economy needed more workers, so factories and offices hired female staff for clerical or production roles. Though some faced discrimination in pay and promotion, the post-war emphasis on democracy and the influence of Western values nudged Japanese society toward acknowledging women's capabilities. Housewives discovered convenience foods at supermarkets, and some re-entered the workforce as their children grew older, fueling a modest but notable trend of working mothers. Social clubs or volunteer groups offered platforms for women to discuss local issues, building confidence in public life. Still, traditional norms lingered. Many men expected wives to handle cooking, child-rearing, and housework even if they also had jobs. Others worried that imported Western ideas would erode Japanese identity. Tensions occasionally flared between older generations who prized communal harmony and younger folks who embraced individual freedoms. Yokohama's status as a port city, open to global influences, meant it was often at the center of these cultural shifts, forging a more cosmopolitan outlook than strictly rural areas. Chapter 7: Approaching the World Stage. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics and Yokohama's role. In 1964, Japan hosted the Tokyo Olympics, a major event symbolizing the nation's comeback after war. Yokohama, being so close to Tokyo, shared some of the excitement. Though most Olympic venues were in the capital, the city benefited from a renewed focus on roads, trains, and hospitality. Tourists arrived, some choosing to stay or visit Yokohama's waterfront, exploring the city's blend of old shrines and modern shops. The port handled increased passenger ship arrivals carrying sports enthusiasts or officials. For many locals, the Olympics felt like a grand statement that Japan was no longer an occupied, war-torn land but a rising industrial power. Television coverage brought real-time sports action into living rooms for the first time, fueling a wave of national pride. This spirit also prompted local governments to beautify streets, plant trees, and refurbish older areas. Yokohama's officials spruced up parks, painted crosswalks more visibly, and urged citizens to show politeness to foreign visitors. Businesses capitalized on the Olympic buzz by selling souvenirs or opening new cafes. Factories took on short-term production orders related to the games, like promotional items or electric signboards. Many families splurged on a black and white TV set, gathering neighbors to watch the Japanese women's volleyball team or track and field events, cheering for medals. This communal viewing fostered a sense of unity, a refreshing change from the bleak post-war memories. At the same time, the city's cultural identity grew stronger. Jazz clubs in Yokohama thrived, hosting jam sessions with visiting foreign musicians. Youth fashion soared with new concepts confidence reflecting global trends. In older wards, some families used extra money from the economic boom to rebuild homes with sturdier materials, mindful of potential earthquakes. The Olympics climaxed in a wave of patriotism and relief that Japan had rejoined the international family of nations through peaceful competition, reinforcing Yokohama's position as a place open to international exchange. Chapter 8. Further economic expansion, factories, shipping and rising incomes. Late 1960s, early 1970s. By the late 1960s, Japan's economy continued its fast climb, known as the economic miracle. Yokohama's factories churned out ever more electronics, car parts, textiles and steel products, many destined for export. Cargo ships lined the modernized port, using mechanized cranes and container methods to load cargo faster. The city's workforce enjoyed higher wages, and the government funded expansions of highways and railway lines to accommodate surging commuter flows. Car ownership among middle-class families rose, creating new traffic woes. Suburbs sprouted around the city, connected by fresh roads and train stations. Families there built modest detached houses with small gardens, a dream unattainable in earlier decades. Shopping centers, sometimes called supermarkets or shopping malls, appeared in suburban spots, selling a wide array of groceries, clothes and appliances under one roof. Such conveniences allowed women to juggle part-time jobs while managing household shopping more efficiently. Shipyards near Yokohama advanced their technology, constructing bigger and more sophisticated vessels. Some turned to building supertankers for oil transport, supporting Japan's heavy dependence on imported energy. However, environmental activists emerged, pointing to pollution from factories and oil spills that threatened marine life in the bay. People living near industrial zones complained about dirty air or unpleasant smells. Over time, local authorities set up basic pollution controls, though they were not as strict as modern standards. Despite these challenges, job openings remained plentiful, and the city's living standards generally rose. Within everyday social life, the bright side included more leisure. Families might go out to newly built bowling alleys, attend baseball games, or visit amusement parks. Television, now often in color, brought global news and shows to local homes. Teenagers glued themselves to pop music from homegrown idols and Western rock. Many believed Yokohama was entering a golden era, bridging tradition and innovation with style. Chapter 9. Social tensions, protests, land issues and cultural debates. Though booming economically, the late 1960s and early 1970s also saw social tensions. Younger citizens, inspired by global protest movements, questioned Japan's rapid industrial growth, condemnation of pollution, and close ties to the US. Some college students held demonstrations in nearby Tokyo, occasionally spreading to Yokohama squares, chanting slogans against war or for environmental protection. Concerned about losing face internationally, city officials tried to keep such protests peaceful. Land development for new factories or housing sometimes displaced older communities. When big corporations or government planners decided to reclaim more land from the bay or demolish older districts, local residents occasionally felt powerless. Some farmland outside Yokohama was bought up cheaply for suburban sprawl, angering farmers who believed land speculators profited unfairly. The city's population soared as rural migrants arrived for factory or construction jobs, leading to cramped living in cheap apartments. This growth without perfect planning triggered friction over resources and public services. Gender roles also remained contentious. Although more women entered offices or factories, wages often lagged behind men's. Childcare facilities were limited, forcing many working mothers to rely on relatives or expensive private care. Advocates demanded more nursery schools, longer maternity leaves, and equal pay for equal work. Some progress came, but it was slow. Meanwhile, the city's social scene was lively, with new clubs or coffee shops opening, fueling debates on modern freedoms. Writers and filmmakers from Yokohama produced works that highlighted both the city's glamorous side and its hidden struggles. Chapter 10. A City on the Threshold, late 1970s, hints of the future. By the mid to late 1970s, Yokohama had transformed into a modern industrial and commercial center. Skyscrapers rose in certain districts, reflecting growing corporate confidence. Container shipping became standard, drastically speeding up cargo handling. and boosting the port's capacity. Metro lines extended deeper into suburban areas, making daily commutes more manageable for office workers. People's living rooms often featured color TVs, washers, and fridges, luxuries in earlier eras. Yet, the seeds of future transitions also appeared. With Japan's shift toward high-tech industries like electronics, automotive, and precision equipment, some older heavy factories in Yokohama started downsizing or relocating. The city recognized it needed new visions for land usage, especially as some industrial zones had become outdated or too polluted. Ideas about turning old factory sites into business parks, cultural districts, or waterfront promenades percolated in city planning meetings. Social changes continued. More women insisted on professional careers. Many youths craved foreign travel and experiences. Even older generations realized the importance of balancing tradition with modern global engagement, something Yokohama had practiced since its treaty port days. Environmental movements gained traction, pressing for bay cleanup and greener city policies. Local politicians tentatively responded with modest ecological regulations. In many ways, the city faced a fork in the road: either remain an industrial powerhouse reliant on large-scale manufacturing, or adapt to a post-industrial age that stressed technology, services, tourism, and cultural creativity. The next decades would see Yokohama innovate in surprising ways, developing grand waterfront projects, new cultural centers, and forging an identity that honored its past while stepping boldly into the future. Yet for now, around the late 1970s, Yokohama stood as a testament to Japan's post-war miracle, rebuilt bustling and prepared for another leap shaped by its unique history and open spirit.
Part 7. Yokohama in the 1980s and 1990s. Rapid growth, ambitious projects, and shifting identities. Chapter 1. Entering the 1980s. Economic confidence and urban ambition. By the start of the 1980s, Japan's post-war economic miracle was still strong, and Yokohama stood proudly as a major port and industrial hub. Container ships came and went from the harbor day and night, carrying goods to and from the world's markets. In the city center, new office buildings and high-rises reflected the confidence of local businesses and global trading firms. Workers commuted by train and bus from expanding suburbs, often departing before sunrise to avoid crush-hour crowds. Many families enjoyed rising incomes, spending on modern appliances, cars, and entertainment. Television talk shows and newspapers highlighted Yokohama's city of the future vibe. Local officials wanted to show that Yokohama was not just an offshoot of Tokyo, so they promoted big redevelopment plans that included new roads, improved rail connections, and carefully designed waterfront areas. In these proposals, old industrial sites near the harbor would give way to modern offices, shops, and leisure destinations. Consumer culture flourished. Department stores held lavish sales, and newly opened music shops sold vinyl records and cassette tapes from Japan, Europe, and America. Families dined out more frequently, sampling both Japanese staples and Western-style fast food that took root in busy commercial districts. Kids raced to game arcades with bright flashing lights, playing the latest video games. Even as the city soared with optimism, some neighborhoods faced the downside of rapid modernization. Construction noise, rising property prices, and the fear that local traditions might be overshadowed by sleek new projects. Chapter 2. The vision of Minato Mirai 21. A modern waterfront. A central pillar of Yokohama's 1980s transformation was Minato Mirai 21, a huge waterfront redevelopment on reclaimed land near the city center. The name means Harbor of the Future 21, and city planners, along with private developers, dreamed of creating a futuristic district of offices, shopping malls, hotels, and entertainment facilities. They also aimed for parks, plazas, and broad walkways along the water where residents and tourists could enjoy bay views and open skies. Workers drove piles into the seabed to stabilize the reclaimed land. Giant cranes, bulldozers, and trucks roamed the site, building an infrastructure of wide roads, underground utilities, and large foundations for new skyscrapers. Local newspapers ran special features on the project, including artists' renderings of futuristic towers and scenic promenades. Business leaders poured money into it, confident that high property values and strong demand would keep the investments profitable. One highlight was the planned landmark tower, which would eventually rise to become one of Japan's tallest buildings. Around it would sit other office high-rises, shopping complexes, and a convention center. The blueprint also called for cultural attractions, an art museum, music venues, and potentially a theme park to attract families and travelers. Critics worried about overspending or overshadowing older districts like the traditional Chinatown or Yamate area. They also voiced concerns about forcibly relocating smaller factories that had stood there for decades. Yet the city pressed on, convinced that Minato Mirai 21 would showcase Yokohama's global aspirations. By the late 1980s, parts of the area were open, letting visitors wander fresh boulevards or admire new high-rises that shaped a fresh skyline. Restaurants serving both Japanese and foreign foods occupied newly built malls, and weekend crowds strolled along open plazas. This shift in land use from heavy industry to commercial and leisure spaces signaled Yokohama's broader move toward a post-industrial economy, one fueled by service sectors, tourism, and advanced technology. Chapter 3. Riding the Bubble Economy. Booming finance and real estate. Throughout the mid to late 1980s, Japan experienced the infamous bubble economy, where real estate and stock prices skyrocketed. Yokohama rode that wave. Land values near the port soared as investors scrambled to buy parcels in the hopes of quick profit. Banks, flush with cash, eagerly lent huge sums to developers, believing property prices would keep climbing. Construction sites popped up all over, not just for Minato Mirai 21 but also for luxury condos, upscale shopping centers, and office towers. Stories abounded of land near the waterfront reaching staggering prices. Middle-class families too felt the euphoria. Some borrowed against rising home equity to start side businesses or purchase second properties. Department stores enjoyed record sales of high-end fashions, jewelry, and gourmet foods. Many young professionals indulged in fancy dining or after-work socializing in stylish bars. Expensive brand-name items from Europe or America became status symbols, displayed proudly as signs of personal success. Taxis were ubiquitous, and nights in Yokohama's entertainment districts glowed with neon lights, reflecting what seemed like endless prosperity. Yet behind the glamour, certain voices warned that these prices were unsustainable. Some local shopkeepers, overshadowed by giant malls, struggled to pay rent. Certain smaller banks engaged in reckless lending without verifying project feasibility. Meanwhile, environmental groups noted that constant land reclamation threatened marine habitats in the bay and overshadowed natural coastlines. Still, most citizens basked in the sense of unstoppable growth, ignoring caution flags. Everyone from corporate executives to local government planners believed Yokohama could only keep rising, forging a bright future with each new building that altered the skyline. Chapter 4. Cultural Renaissance. Arts, music, and cross-cultural flair. With more money and international ties, Yokohama's cultural scene thrived in the 1980s. Jazz clubs harking back to the city's post-war years welcomed local and foreign musicians nightly. Some bars specialized in Latin or rock music, drawing curious youth from all over the Kanto region. The city's creative spirit also fueled art exhibitions, theatrical performances, and experimental dance shows. Venues in renovated warehouses hosted edgy displays, bridging the gap between global contemporary art and Japan's own avant-garde. For everyday families, new TV programs and magazines introduced lifestyle ideas, from Western table manners to interior decorating tips featuring bright pastel colors or minimalist aesthetics. Traditional amusements such as kabuki or enka concerts found fans among older generations, but younger folks craved foreign pop hits, disco, and eventually the rising wave of J-pop idols. Chinatown, a long-standing symbol of Yokohama's open identity, offered vibrant festivals, especially during Lunar New Year. Restaurants served Chinese dishes adapted to local tastes, while shops sold sweets and teas that drew large weekend crowds. Urban design also blended East and West. Some new buildings around the bay used glass and steel exteriors with Western influences, while decorative lamp posts or sculptures showcased local artists' interpretations of maritime or historical themes. Tourists from other parts millions of Japan visited the city for its romantic night views of illuminated harbors and high-rises. Young couples might walk along newly built waterfront promenades, pausing at small cafes or benches overlooking anchored ships. This cross-cultural flair became an asset, marketing Yokohama as a unique alternative to Tokyo's massive sprawl. Chapter 5. Sudden Crash. The bubble bursts. Early 1990s. By the early 1990s, Japan's bubble economy burst. Real estate prices and stock values collapsed rapidly, leaving a trail of bad loans and bankruptcies. Yokohama, which had reveled in the property boom, felt the shock. Developers who had overbuilt or borrowed heavily could no longer repay banks. Construction sites halted mid-progress, leaving half-finished towers or vacant plots. The city's once busy real estate offices shut their doors, and many newly minted property speculators lost fortunes in mere months. Banks and financial institutions faced crisis. Some local branches teetered on the edge of insolvency, laying off staff. Large companies cut spending, freezing expansions or canceling new projects, including elements of the Minato Mirai 21 vision that seemed less essential. Unemployment rose, especially among white-collar employees in finance, real estate, or related industries. The mood soured. Gone were the champagne parties and lavish expense accounts, replaced by caution or outright fear. Government revenues declined as property taxes fell sharply. This forced city planners to scale back or postpone certain improvements in roads, parks, or social programs. Small shops around certain high-end shopping complexes saw fewer customers, leading to closures. People started saving money instead of indulging in luxuries, bracing for uncertain times. While daily life did not revert to the struggles of post-war days, the sharp difference from the bubble's heyday rattled Yokohama's confidence. The city had to shift gears, seeking stable long-term growth instead of quick speculation. Some local economists argued that the crash might ultimately be healthy, clearing out reckless development and prompting more balanced urban planning. Chapter 6. Life in the downturn, coping strategies and social impacts. During this economic slump, Yokohama's citizens found new ways to adapt. Families cut down on unnecessary spending, fewer expensive dinners, simpler vacations, and caution about big-ticket purchases like cars or second homes. Thrift shops and discount stores became more common, catering to those who still needed clothes, household items, or gifts, but at lower prices. Television, once full of glamorous ads for luxury products, shifted to more practical commercials focusing on everyday goods or bargains. Businesses also restructured. Some factories partially automated to reduce labor costs, leading to layoffs. Office workers faced pay cuts or fewer bonuses. Even government staff saw wage freezes. Still, not all was bleak. Smaller-scale entrepreneurs launched budget restaurants, local produce markets, or specialized crafts, finding a niche among cost-conscious consumers who preferred local authenticity over brand names. Neighborhood festivals gained renewed importance for community bonding, providing free entertainment and a sense of shared heritage. In housing, many who had purchased condos at peak bubble prices were underwater, meaning they owed more on mortgages than the home was now worth. Real estate agents offered fewer fancy showrooms, focusing on basic and affordable housing. On the bright side, some families who had been priced out earlier could now rent or buy property at reduced costs if they had stable jobs. Politicians discussed how to reignite growth without returning to reckless speculation. Urban experts recommended investing in education, technology, and cultural tourism, areas that might bolster Yokohama's economy in the longer run. Chapter 7. Cultural and touristic revival. Mid-1990s rebound. By the mid-1990s, a modest sense of recovery emerged. While the financial sector remained cautious, certain industries like automotive parts, electronics, and specialized machinery found new overseas markets, bringing income to Yokohama-based exporters. The port kept busy shipping these goods to Asia, Europe, and North America. Tourists, both domestic and foreign, visited Yokohama for its historical sites, especially the old foreign settlements, Chinatown, and newly completed sections of Minato Mirai 21 that offered panoramic waterfront views. Local authorities promoted cultural tourism with well-advertised events. For example, a Yokohama festival might feature traditional performances, local crafts, and street food, highlighting the city's blend of Japanese and Western influences. Neighborhoods near the harbor introduced walking tours that explained the city's treaty port origins, the devastation of World War II, and the subsequent rebuilding.
Some visitors discovered smaller museums devoted to maritime history or to the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. These tours provided both educational content and emotional resonance, reminding people how resilience shaped the city's character. In parallel, technology-based firms began renting cheaper office spaces left vacant by the crash, often in older buildings they renovated. Some specialized in software, robotics, or network solutions. Young entrepreneurs liked Yokohama's location, close enough to Tokyo's resources but with a calmer atmosphere and slightly lower rents. Among the city's youth, internet usage rose and local bulletin boards or early websites promoted new clubs, meetups, and cultural happenings. This gave grassroots culture an online presence, broadening the city's creative energy. Steadily, the city's identity as a historical but forward-looking port re-emerged, bridging tradition with digital trends. Chapter 8. Infrastructure upgrades and environmental concerns. Throughout the 1990s, Yokohama's infrastructure saw further improvements, albeit at a slower pace than during the bubble. The city polished its subway and commuter train lines, connecting suburban populations more efficiently. Road expansions also continued, though tight budgets forced some grand highway plans to be scaled back or delayed. Urban planners focused on reducing bottlenecks around major intersections, encouraging public transit use to ease growing traffic congestion. Environmental activism grew louder as well. Citizen groups demanded cleaner air, mindful of factory emissions near the port. Younger residents supported recycling programs and in some wards separated trash collection for paper, plastic, metals, and glass became standard. The local government placed stricter rules on industrial wastewater to protect the bay's water quality. Some fish species returned and limited recreational boating or fishing tours began. Land reclamation slowed, with officials acknowledging the importance of preserving natural coastline or wetlands. While Yokohama remained a heavily developed city, these ecological steps signaled a changing attitude, an effort to balance commerce with stewardship. Disaster preparedness also evolved, shaped by the memory of the Great Kanto earthquake and the more recent 1995 Kobe earthquake. Building codes required more quake-resistant structures, including special shock-absorbing materials. Citizens participated in annual drill days, practicing evacuation routes or first aid basics. Public buildings stored emergency supplies like water, blankets, and instant foods. The city's readiness to handle potential future disasters, whether seismic or typhoons, was recognized as vital for maintaining global business confidence. Companies especially valued consistent port operations, so harbor facilities tested backup power systems and structural reinforcements to endure strong shaking or tidal surges. Chapter 9. Changing social fabric, diversity, education, and community. The 1990s also saw shifts in Yokohama's social fabric. More foreigners arrived from different parts of Asia, drawn by job opportunities in restaurants, construction, or small factories. This influx rejuvenated some older shopping streets where Vietnamese, Filipino, or Nepalese stores sprang up, adding to the city's long-standing mix of Chinese, Korean, and Western communities. Some older residents felt uncertain about these newcomers, but many younger people embraced the multicultural environment as part of Yokohama's open port legacy. Education reflected the city's global perspective. Schools taught English from earlier grades, and some introduced second foreign languages. University partnerships with overseas institutions allowed students to study abroad or exchange research. Local colleges specialized in international business, marine biology, and engineering, hoping to produce a new generation of thinkers who could handle the complexities of a post-industrial age. Meanwhile, community centers offered language classes for foreign residents, fostering better integration. Life in typical neighborhoods combined old traditions, annual festivals, shrine visits, communal block parties with modern routines of shopping at malls or convenience stores. Young families often lived in mid-rise apartment complexes with shared playgrounds, hosting potluck gatherings on weekends. Retirees enjoyed bus tours to scenic spots or joined seniors clubs for knitting or tai chi, sometimes welcoming foreign neighbors to join if they shared a bit of local language. Chapter 10. Approaching the millennium. Late 1990s outlook for Yokohama. By the late 1990s, Yokohama had evolved substantially since the dark post-war days and the frantic bubble era. The city had replaced many outdated factories with offices, cultural venues, and tech startups while still maintaining an industrial base in specialized zones. Minato Mirai 21, though not fully completed as originally planned, stood as a symbol of forward-looking urban design, boasting modern skyscrapers, large shopping malls, a convention center, and scenic waterfront promenades. People strolled among fountains and sculptures, enjoying a calmer pace compared to the 1980s hustle. Population growth remained steady, fueled by job seekers moving from smaller towns or younger generations wanting the city's convenience. Land prices had stabilized after the crash, making housing somewhat more accessible. Families who had weathered the bubble's meltdown felt cautious optimism about the future. They desired a city that balanced business success, green living, and cultural richness. Preparations for the new millennium stirred excitement. City officials planned festivals, conferences, and special events highlighting Yokohama's maritime heritage and readiness for the digital age. Enhanced internet infrastructure let businesses connect globally, and local entrepreneurs explored e-commerce platforms. The city's challenge was to foster stable growth and maintain inclusive social systems that supported every citizen, from senior farmers on the outskirts to young engineers building cutting-edge solutions. Entering the 21st century, Yokohama carried forward its identity as a place shaped by waves of change: treaty port beginnings, war devastation, post-war rebuilding, bubble booms, and cautious recovery. With each test, the city drew on a mix of resilience, openness, and ingenuity. Now in the threshold of a new era, Yokohama was poised to reshape itself again, weaving old traditions into a vibrant tapestry of modern industries, global culture, and urban sustainability.
Part 8. Yokohama. In the 2000s and 2010, Reinvention, Cultural Energy, and Global Engagement. Chapter 1. Stepping into the 21st century, Hope and New Plans. As the year 2000 arrived, Yokohama stood on the threshold of a new era. After the challenges of the 1990s bubble crash, the city found fresh energy in the emerging global economy. Technology, finance, and tourism, rather than heavy industry, were now key pillars in shaping Yokohama's direction. City leaders promoted an image of a modern, eco-friendly harbor, blending high-tech progress with historical charm. Development around Minato Mirai 21 accelerated, building on earlier phases to fill empty lots with eye-catching skyscrapers, malls, and public spaces. Architects and planners worked to ensure open plazas and greenery, aiming for a balance between glass and steel towers and human-scale walkways where families could stroll. At the same time, digital transformation swept through daily life. Internet usage soared among residents, with home computers and soon, mobile phones connecting people to the wider world. Businesses set up websites for marketing, while local entrepreneurs explored online sales and services. Schools taught more computer skills, and libraries offered free computer access to narrow the digital gap. Yokohama's students and office workers learned to rely on email, online research, and newly emerging social media platforms. The sense of living in a fast-changing, hyper-connected era spurred optimism. Perhaps the city could rise again as a global beacon of commerce and innovation. The local government also pushed for sustainability. Officials recognized that earlier growth had sometimes harmed the environment. Now they backed recycling initiatives, improved sewage systems, and greenbelt expansions. Some factories updated to cleaner technologies, and neighborhoods formed volunteer groups to remove litter from the harborfront or replant small forest patches. These efforts aimed not only to beautify the city, but also to align with global calls for ecological responsibility. Citizens got used to sorting trash into multiple categories: burnable, plastic, cans, bottles, and municipalities set up dedicated pickup schedules. In everyday routines, life felt more stable than in the wild bubble days. Most families had stable incomes, though not extravagant, and they could afford leisure time on weekends. Sporting events and festivals drew crowds to the waterfront. The landmark Tower Observation Deck remained a favorite spot for panoramic views, especially at sunset. Tourists, both from within Japan and abroad, increasingly saw Yokohama as a must-visit location, offering world-class shopping, cultural districts like Chinatown and Yamate, and an ever-evolving cityscape blending old and new. Chapter 2: Transforming the waterfront and urban spaces. Through the early 2000s, Yokohama's Minato Mirai 21 area advanced to its next stage. Giant shopping complexes opened, featuring global fashion brands alongside local designer boutiques. Developers added more entertainment facilities, including cinemas, arcades, and indoor amusement sections. The main boulevards were lined with well-lit sidewalks where buskers and street performers entertained passing crowds at night. The newly built Pacifico Yokohama Convention Center hosted international conferences and trade fairs, bringing delegates from around the world. Many visitors marveled at how this district had risen from what was once industrial or vacant land a couple of decades earlier. Beyond Minato Mirai, city officials sought to upgrade older districts. Chinatown, one of Yokohama's key historical attractions, received infrastructure improvements like better signage, cleaner walkways, and decorative arches that celebrated Chinese festivals. Neighborhood associations worked with the city to reduce traffic bottlenecks and preserve local authenticity, so the area would not lose its charm. Meanwhile, the Yamate and Motomachi areas, known for their older Western-style houses and upscale shopping streets, also found fresh vitality through heritage tourism. Planners promoted walking tours that told stories of Yokohama's treaty port era, letting visitors imagine the days of foreign consuls and bustling colonial enclaves. In tandem, the city tackled transport. The new Minato Mirai line, an extension connecting Yokohama Station to the harbor, greatly eased commutes to offices and tourist spots. Over time, additional station entrances, escalators, and signage made traveling simpler, especially for foreign guests who might not read Japanese. Buses, too, integrated with rail lines, adopting stored fare cards and timetables that matched commuter schedules. A bicycle-sharing pilot gave locals a greener option to move between office complexes and residential blocks. Public art sprang up along plazas and station corridors, reflecting a city-wide push for more human-friendly design. Large sculptures or murals often highlighted maritime or historical themes, bridging tradition and contemporary expression. Citizens praised how wide walkways allowed strolling families, joggers, and the occasional street market. Weekend craft fairs or farmers markets sold organic vegetables, homemade jams, and artisan pastries, giving an alternative to corporate chain stores. More dog-friendly open spaces appeared, from small dog runs to bigger waterfront parks. All these developments aimed to project a vibrant, global-minded Yokohama, a place where people could enjoy business, leisure, and culture within a well-organized, visually pleasant urban environment. Throughout these transformations, though, some older residents expressed nostalgia for the simpler times of smaller shops and less tourist traffic. Balancing modernization with neighborhood warmth remained a constant challenge. Chapter 3: Economic Diversification and Technology Growth. While Yokohama preserved some older industries like precision manufacturing and shipping, the city also embraced tech-based growth in the 2000s. Zones in or around Minato Mirai 21 encouraged high-tech startups, software companies, and research labs. Office spaces once reserved for big corporations now housed smaller, more flexible firms, people designing apps, working on robotics, or developing digital media. Some local universities offered programs in engineering, IT, and international business, funneling graduates into new jobs right in the city. As e-commerce soared globally, Yokohama's port adapted to handle rising volumes of international parcels, sometimes from online shops in Europe or America, bound for Japanese consumers. Shipping lines expanded cargo tracking systems, letting merchants and customers see real-time updates on their deliveries. The city's advanced container terminals used computerized cranes and inventory management to quickly move goods from ship to truck or rail. Officials recognized that efficient logistics were crucial to competing with other Asian ports, so they invested in port expansions and dredging deeper channels. Innovation centers popped up in older factory blocks converted into open-plan studios. These collaborative spaces brought together entrepreneurs, designers, and engineers aiming to develop new products or services. Some focused on environmental technology, such as solar panels suited for city rooftops or improved wastewater treatment. Others specialized in gaming, animation, or digital marketing. Yokohama's historical contact with the West made it easier for these startups to attract foreign partners or mentors. Still, the city had to confront global competition from Chinese or Southeast Asian ports, which sometimes offered cheaper labor or lower fees. Large shipping lines weighed whether to dock in Yokohama or choose alternative harbors in the region. The municipal government responded by refining regulations, cutting bureaucratic red tape, and granting tax breaks for companies that settled in Yokohama's industrial or tech zones. City leaders argued that the city's stable infrastructure, skilled workforce, and comfortable living environment gave it a unique edge. Salaries in new tech jobs were generally better than old manufacturing roles, though that also raised housing costs in certain central neighborhoods. Construction of modern apartment towers near the harbor soared once more, reminiscent of the bubble era, albeit with more caution. For many young families, having an apartment with easy access to offices, malls, and leisure spots was ideal. Others chose suburban areas further from the center, preferring a house with a yard, commuting by train for 30 to 40 minutes each day. The variety of lifestyles revealed the city's expanding social fabric, from tech-savvy singles to multi-generational families. Chapter 4: World Events and Yokohama's International Outlook. World events in the early 2000s also affected Yokohama's global engagement. Crises like the 2008 global financial meltdown tested the city's economic resilience. Companies that relied on foreign consumers suddenly faced drops in orders, especially in fields like auto parts or electronics. The port saw fewer cargo ships for a time. However, unlike the 1990s bubble crash, this global downturn was shared worldwide, and Japan had stronger safety nets in place. Government stimulus measures and currency shifts helped stabilize trade. Meanwhile, Yokohama hosted more international conferences, reflecting Japan's stable political climate and the city's robust facilities at Pacifico Yokohama. Delegates arrived to discuss topics like climate change, renewable energy, and sustainable urban planning. Attendees often took tours showcasing the city's waterfront redevelopment, giving Yokohama chances to share lessons from its transformation. Such events boosted local hospitality, with hotels, restaurants, and transport services benefiting from increased visitors. Cruise ships also made Yokohama a regular stop, especially as Asian cruise travel grew popular among retirees and tourists seeking to explore multiple ports in a single journey. The Ozanbashi Pier, redesigned with an architectural flourish, welcomed large liners that poured hundreds or thousands of travelers into the city for short excursions. They visited Chinatown, museums, and shopping areas, generating tourism revenue. Some critics worried about the environmental toll of big cruise vessels, but city officials saw them as part of a balanced tourism strategy. Yokohama's population continued to diversify. New waves of immigrants from places like Vietnam, Nepal, or Brazil found jobs in factories or service work. Many joined established communities, like the Chinese or Korean enclaves, forming cultural networks that added to Yokohama's global identity. Language classes and community centers offered resources to help foreigners navigate Japan's healthcare, education, and job systems. Younger Japanese in turn learned about global cultures from these new neighbors, forging cross-cultural friendships that were once rare. On the political front, city leaders forged sister city relationships with foreign ports, exchanging visits by mayors, business councils, and cultural troops. These ties aimed to open new trade pipelines and tourism promotions. Citizens enjoyed festivals featuring foreign dance or music groups from sister cities, while local artisans traveled abroad to show off Yokohama's crafts. This global tapestry enriched everyday life,
reminding locals that the city had welcomed international influences since the 19th century. Chapter 5: Environmental Consciousness and Urban Ecosystems. Growing environmental awareness shaped Yokohama's planning in the 2000s and 2010s. Residents, having seen pollution in earlier decades, championed cleaner air and water. City officials set stricter emission standards for factories, expanded green belts, and required large new buildings to include energy-saving features. Carpooling and hybrid vehicles rose in popularity, aided by government incentive. Some wards introduced stricter garbage sorting rules to further reduce landfill waste, building on the recycling mindset that had taken root in the 1990s. The bay itself recovered significantly from past pollution, with better sewage treatment and monitoring of industrial runoff. Certain fish species returned in small numbers, pleasing local anglers who cast lines near renovated piers. Eco-focused non-profits organized bay cleanup days, drawing volunteers to pick trash along the shoreline. While Yokohama remained a dense city, pockets of wildlife thrived in small wetlands or wooded slopes on the outskirts. Green rooftops also became fashionable, especially on corporate towers in Minato Mirai 21. Some offices created rooftop gardens for employees, hosting small vegetable plots or flower beds. Local schools started eco-clubs, where children learned about biodiversity, setting up projects to grow herbs in planters or track local bird population. This interest in nature reflected a desire for a healthier, more balanced urban life after decades of fast industrial and commercial growth. Another wave of city-led programs aimed to reduce carbon emissions. Improved public transit, including expansions to the subway and bus lanes, encouraged people to commute without cars. Bike paths were laid along certain boulevards, and shared bike stations let residents rent bicycles for short trips. Some Tokyo-bound commuters began riding e-bikes to a station, then taking trains the rest of the way. This trend hinted at a new era where convenience and environmental care could go hand in hand. Even corporations took part, installing solar panels on large rooftops or setting up green curtains of climbing plants on building exteriors to shade windows from harsh sun. These shifts were still works in progress. Congestion, noise, and pollution remained issues, especially near heavy shipping zones. But the overall direction leaned toward a greener Yokohama, one that valued open spaces and recognized that modern success required a commitment to sustainability. Chapter 6: Social Diversity and Evolving Family Structures. The early 2000s and 2010s also brought social changes to Yokohama's population. More young professionals delayed marriage or chose smaller families, leading to concerns about an aging demographic. Some older wards saw plenty of seniors, but fewer children, leading to the consolidation of elementary schools or opening of specialized senior care facilities. Meanwhile, the city tried to attract fresh talent by advertising job openings in technology or service sectors, hoping new residents would keep communities vibrant. Women's roles advanced further. A number of local companies, pressed by social demand and some government guidelines, introduced family-friendly work policies, like flexible hours or child care allowances. The city set up more public daycare centers and after-school programs, though demand often outstripped supply. Mothers who worked in offices or taught in schools found it less burdensome to continue careers, though many still faced cultural expectations to handle housework and childcare. Younger couples sometimes adopted more equal approaches to chores, pointing to generational shifts in attitudes. Immigrant families from various countries put down deeper roots, with second-generation children attending local schools and speaking Japanese fluently, while also learning their parents' languages at home. Festivities like Diwali, Lunar New Year, or Vietnamese Tet began to appear in some community calendars, showcasing the city's multicultural outlook. The city library system offered foreign language books, and local ward offices improved translation services to help non-Japanese speakers navigate healthcare. taxes or housing processes. At the same time, some Japanese families worried about losing old customs. Festivals at shrines or local block parties sometimes had fewer participants as younger folks were busy or felt less connected to local tradition. Yet many saw this as a chance for fusion, blending local dance or music with foreign influences to create new forms of cultural expression. Emergent youth subcultures borrowed global styles, yet found ways to incorporate a uniquely Yokohama twist, perhaps referencing the city's treaty port heritage or harbor identity in their fashion or street art. In sum, people recognized that an evolving diverse population could enrich Yokohama, preserving historical roots while adapting to global norms. Chapter 7: Tourism Surges and the Popularity of Local Attractions Throughout the 2000s. Yokohama's improvements in infrastructure, environment, and culture boosted tourism. Domestic visitors from other parts of Japan flocked to see the reborn Minato Mirai 21 with its towering skyline, the lively Cosmo World amusement park, and the grand landmark Tower observation deck. Families enjoyed a weekend in the city, riding Ferris wheels or strolling along breezy waterfront promenades, snapping photos of the bay. Others shopped at malls like Queen Square, dining on fusion cuisine that combined Western styles with Japanese tastes. Chinatown remained a top draw. Culinary festivals showcased dim sum, roast duck, and sweet buns, along with lion dances and vibrant lantern displays. Tourists also ventured into the older Yamashita Park area to watch passing ships, admire flower beds, or catch local street performers. Historical routes took them to the Bluff, where a handful of 19th century Western houses stood, converted into museums or tea rooms. By marketing these attractions, Yokohama retained its legacy as a place where East met West. International tourism picked up as well, aided by Japan's overall push to welcome overseas travelers. Cruise liners docked at the redesigned Osanbashi Pier, with a sweeping modern roof that created a park-like deck. Passengers disembarked to find easy bus or train links to central Yokohama or Tokyo. Guides fluent in English or Chinese offered city tours, highlighting the Great Kanto earthquake remnants, World War II bomb damage, and the dynamic rebuilding that followed. Some visitors commented on how calm and clean the city was, praising how it balanced historical references and modern architecture. Local events like the Yokohama Triennale, an international art festival, drew creative minds from all over, filling galleries and converted warehouses with installations. Meanwhile, the city's many festivals, ranging from fireworks extravaganzas in summer to the Lunar New Year in winter, attracted huge crowds. This surge in tourism benefited small businesses, cafes, souvenir shops, traditional sweet stores, and hotels all saw increased sales. Still, city planners worried about overcrowding or high property prices near tourist hotspots, trying to keep a stable mix of residential life, commerce, and visitor appeal. Chapter 8: Infrastructure Upgrades, Commuter Solutions, and City Connectivity. To manage population growth and rising visitor numbers, Yokohama continued upgrading its roads, railways, and transit networks during the 2000s and 2010s. The city expanded the subway lines that linked key stations like Yokohama Station, Sakuragicho, and Shin Yokohama, aiming to reduce congestion on the main JR lines. Newer train cars featured air conditioning, easy-to-read signage in multiple languages, and barrier-free access for older passengers or wheelchair users. Suburban lines also introduced express services for those commuting to Tokyo, cutting travel times to under 30 minutes in some cases. Highways around Yokohama, such as the Bayshore route, were widened or connected by new ramps, alleviating rush hour traffic but also tempting more drivers onto the roads. The city introduced parking restrictions near central wards, encouraging people to use trains or buses instead of private cars. Some modern offices in Minato Mirai provided shuttle buses for employees, hoping to reduce the region's carbon footprint. The improved bus networks, with digital displays showing real-time arrivals, helped serve neighborhoods not directly on a train line, Ports also adapted to larger container ships. Automated crane systems and advanced tracking software made cargo handling more efficient. Dock workers, once reliant on manual labor, now operated specialized machinery, requiring training in electronics and computer-based monitoring. The city's shipping authority cooperated with global logistics firms, ensuring that Yokohama remained competitive with other Asian ports like Hong Kong or Busan. Alongside these expansions, municipal authorities worked to beautify transit hubs. Stations got renovated interiors, new lighting, and more public art. Environmental features like rooftop gardens or vertical greenery on station walls aimed to keep temperatures down and add a pleasant atmosphere for the daily commuter rush. Some stations set up small libraries or reading corners, letting passengers borrow or swap books while waiting. Residents appreciated these touches, seeing them as part of Yokohama's push to enhance daily quality of life and well-being. Still, some commuter lines remained crowded, with morning trains packed so tightly that staff had to guide passengers into cars. Many asked for further expansions or additional lines. Others wanted more dedicated bicycle paths, enabling short-haul commutes without relying on cars or buses. Balancing these demands with budget constraints tested city planners, who had to weigh each project's cost against potential benefits. Yet overall, Yokohama's transit continued to rank among Japan's most reliable, fueling strong connectivity to the broader Kanto region. Chapter 9: Cultural Exchanges, Festivals, and the city's global brand. In the 2010s, Yokohama's local government and tourism office promoted the city's global brand more than ever. They highlighted its treaty port history, post-war recovery, and modern transformations. Various cultural exchanges took place with sister cities abroad. Delegations visited from Europe, North America, and Asia to see Yokohama's port systems, Minato Mirai's architecture, and environmental projects. Similarly, Yokohama artists or engineers traveled overseas, sharing expertise or creative insights. Festivals became larger, more internationally themed. The annual Yokohama Port Festival combined fireworks, concerts, and parades that paid tribute to the city's maritime roots. Chinatown's Lunar New Year celebrations brought costumed dragon dances to the main streets, capturing media attention and drawing families from other prefectures. Meanwhile, local wards organized smaller events like Italian weeks or Thai food fairs, highlighting the city's multicultural population. Some older residents reminisced about the era when foreigners first arrived in Yokohama's port, forging friendships that shaped the city's tolerant spirit. Local universities introduced more exchange programs, letting foreign students study Japanese language or culture in Yokohama for a semester or two. International dorms or guest houses served these visitors, who also explored job opportunities in local tech or service industries. Many turned into enthusiastic ambassadors, writing about Yokohama's coffee shops, jazz bars, and calm waterfront parks on social media, fueling a positive image for potential tourists or business partners. With technology enabling remote communication, city-based companies formed overseas partnerships more easily. Virtual conferences replaced some costly business travel. Still, face-to-face encounters remained valued in Japanese culture. Thus, corporate events or symposiums in Yokohama's convention centers thrived, bringing global experts to speak about shipping technology, renewable energy, or robotics. Hotels and local shops benefited from this constant flow of professionals. Yet the city was not free of problems. Younger generations often complained about high rents in prime districts, while older neighborhoods contended with aging populations and fewer local services. Some critics felt the city catered too much to tourists and big corporations, ignoring small business owners or artists struggling to afford workspace. Others worried that adopting global trends might erode unique local traditions. Despite these debates, most recognized that Yokohama's open, outward-looking stance had enriched it across many decades, ensuring continued vibrancy in a swiftly changing global context. Chapter 10: Yokohama's late 2010s, balancing innovation and roots. By the late 2010s, Yokohama proudly displayed its success as a center of commerce, culture, and modern urban living. The Minato Mirai skyline, featuring Landmark Tower, the Queen Square complex, and the Cosmo Clock Ferris wheel, came to symbolize the city's forward-facing identity. Offices buzzed with activity in fields like software, digital media, finance, and advanced engineering. On weekends, families and couples filled the malls, restaurants, and waterfront promenades, sometimes attending open-air concerts or craft fairs. Transport improvements continued. The city tested hybrid or electric buses, introduced more bilingual station signs, and extended bus or train routes into newly developed suburban pockets. Some wards tried car-free days, closing certain streets to vehicles to let pedestrians and cyclists roam freely. A handful of commuter ferry services also operated short routes around the bay, presenting an alternative scenic path to get to the office. Environmental watchers praised the city's improving air quality, though heavy shipping still emitted pollutants. The push for fully sustainable practices carried on, with local universities spearheading research on tidal or solar energy to power coastal facilities. Culturally, Yokohama maintained a dynamic roster of festivals, everything from global food events to high-tech expos featuring the latest gadgets. The city's historical museums used virtual reality to let visitors see old Yokohama as it once was, bridging intangible heritage with digital innovation. Younger artists staged exhibits in repurposed warehouses, weaving modern dance or experimental music with references to the city's maritime past. Some local schools partnered with foreign institutions to run exchange programs, bringing teenage students from Europe or Asia to experience everyday life in a typical Japanese city that was neither purely rural nor as overwhelming as central Tokyo. However, social issues remained in focus. The aging population demanded better elder care, with more retirement homes or community nursing services. Daycare shortages persisted despite municipal expansions, pushing working mothers to juggle waiting lists. City planners debated how to expand housing near the waterfront without pushing rent prices too high, risking gentrification that could drive out older or lower-income residents. Neighborhood associations tried to preserve local festivals like Makoshi parades or temple fairs, so younger folks wouldn't forget their cultural roots. This delicate balancing act between global innovation and local authenticity defined Yokohama's path. Entering the 2020s, Yokohama carried forward a proud legacy. Once a quiet fishing spot, it became a treaty port, survived war destruction, overcame economic booms and busts, and now glowed as a thriving metropolis. Its people, shaped by waves of history, accepted that the city would keep evolving, forging new visions, while honoring the deep ties that bound them to the harbor, the land, and each other.
Part 9. Yokohama. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, new challenges, adaptations, and community strength. Chapter 1. Yokohama's continuing growth. Late 2010s, hopes and plans. In the later 2010s, Yokohama was recognized across Japan as a strong, lively city, shaped by its port heritage, cultural blend, and modern expansions like Minato Mirai 21. Global trade routes remain crucial. Large container ships still docked at the port, moving electronics, machinery, and consumer goods to and from international markets. Companies around Yokohama specialized in advanced manufacturing, robotics, and digital innovation, while smaller businesses thrived on tourism and services for residents seeking a comfortable lifestyle. Suburban zones grew denser, with new housing complexes sprouting near railway stations, allowing quicker commutes. Some older districts previously overlooked experienced gradual renewal as younger families moved in, renovated older homes, and supported local shops. City officials promoted walkable neighborhoods, adding benches, better lighting and signs in multiple languages. They also improved bus schedules, integrated with train timetables, so people could reach outlying corners without a private car. These measures, combined with widely available daycares and public libraries, made the city more family-friendly. Construction projects around the bay pushed ahead, including finishing touches in Minato Mirai 21, hotels, shopping centers and cultural venues. As each new building was completed, critics warned that overdevelopment might drive up rents or overshadow older local culture. Yet boosters insisted that a dynamic waterfront could attract foreign investors and younger talent. Some older warehouses, rather than being demolished, were converted into galleries or event halls, letting the city preserve a bit of its industrial past while welcoming new usage. Tourist pamphlets boasted of Yokohama's balance between historical charm, high-rise modernity and scenic harbor walks. During this time, the city government held public discussions on resilience, how to guard against potential earthquakes or major storms. Building codes required quake-resistant designs, and neighborhoods organized safety drills. Temporary shelters at schools or community centers stored blankets, water, and basic supplies in case of sudden emergencies. The memory of the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 remained a guiding lesson in preparedness. Citizens appreciated these efforts, but many realized that unpredictable climate changes might also bring heavier typhoons or tidal surges in the future. Cultural events continued to flourish, from jazz festivals and open-air film screenings to Chinatown's vibrant Lunar New Year celebrations. College students volunteered at local fairs or helped with art installations in once-empty plazas. Weekends saw families enjoying green spaces along the waterfront or exploring side streets with cozy cafes. Guided walking tours highlighted everything from the city's treaty port heritage to modern pop culture hotspots, giving Yokohama a fresh identity as both globally connected and rich in local stories. Chapter 2: Technology, Innovation and Future-Focused Districts. By the late 2010s, city planners realized that Yokohama needed to strengthen its reputation as a center for tech, research and creative industries, not just shipping and tourism. They designated certain districts as innovation zones, encouraging startups and established firms to collaborate on robotics, artificial intelligence and medical technology. Old factory blocks were reimagined as open floor offices or shared workspaces where programmers, engineers and designers worked side by side. Some local universities partnered with companies to develop prototypes like autonomous vehicles that could navigate the city's busy roads. Firms in Yokohama specialized in advanced manufacturing, creating precision components for electric cars, aerospace projects, or energy-saving devices. They leveraged the city's port for easy import of raw materials and export of finished goods. Investors from overseas occasionally visited these labs, intrigued by Japan's engineering expertise. Meanwhile, smaller tech businesses focused on apps, e-commerce, or creative digital services, finding an urban environment that blended modern infrastructure with a slower pace than Tokyo's central wards. Many of these innovation zones included public event spaces for tech conferences or maker fairs showcasing early prototypes or inventions. School groups toured these facilities, fueling children's curiosity about science and engineering. Summer camps offered coding or robotics lessons, hoping to cultivate the next generation of problem solvers. The city also introduced free Wi-Fi hotspots in key areas, boosting digital connectivity for tourists and locals alike. Alongside these high-tech endeavors, officials reminded everyone of environmental goals. Energy-efficient designs were encouraged in new towers with rooftop solar panels and rainwater reuse systems. Some labs experimented with tidal power along the bay or advanced battery storage to stabilize energy supply. Neighborhood associations insisted that a truly modern city must be eco-friendly, pushing for further electric vehicle charging stations, better waste management and more green corridors linking parks. Public reaction varied. Younger professionals praised the city's forward momentum, while some older residents missed smaller-scale community-driven commerce. Traditional shops and markets felt overshadowed by large developers promoting sleek new complexes. Still, most recognized that times were changing. By aligning with leading technology and design practices, Yokohama could ensure its place among global cities forging tomorrow's industries. Tech entrepreneurs praised the synergy of coastal living, advanced infrastructure, and local universities producing talent. It seemed the city was building an ecosystem that might keep it competitive well into the future. Chapter 3: Tourism in the 21st Century. Heritage and leisure combined tourism in Yokohama continued to rise through the 2010s, boosted by Japan's overall increase in foreign visitors. Nearby Tokyo attracted large numbers of tourists, many of whom took day trips or short stays in Yokohama to explore the harborfront, historic sites, and culinary delights. Modern promotional campaigns highlighted the city's unique identity, where old meets new along scenic promenades and east meets west in cultural fusion spots like Chinatown or the Bluff District. Minato Mirai 21's high-rises and malls sparkled at night, drawing crowds for waterfront dinners and rides on the brightly lit Ferris wheel. Landmarks like the Red Brick Warehouse, converted into trendy shops and event halls, hosted concerts, craft fairs, and seasonal markets. Visitors from abroad found it a refreshing change from Tokyo's intense bustle, praising how open squares and sea breezes gave a more relaxed vibe. Local guides offered tours by foot or boat, explaining the city's evolution from treaty port days to the present tech-oriented era. Chinatown remained a lively must-see. Tourists sampled dumplings, spicy dishes, and sweet buns from street stalls or sat in large banquet halls featuring lanterns and dragon decorations. Annual celebrations for the Lunar New Year or Mid-Autumn Festival included lion dances, fireworks, and special menus. The city took pride in promoting these traditions, bridging cultural gaps between Japanese locals and Chinese residents. Souvenir shops sold everything from simple paper fans to ornate Chinese dresses, while bilingual menus helped visitors navigate the wide range of food. Historical neighborhoods also drew interest. The Yamate area showcased old Western-style homes perched on hills, offering panoramic harbor views. Some were turned into mini-museums, each telling stories of merchants or diplomats who once lived there. Meanwhile, smaller temples or shrines in the older wards provided glimpses of more traditional worship and quiet local festival. These spots gave travelers a fuller sense of Yokohama's rich past, contrasting the sleek steel and glass of the new city center. Beyond these marquee sites, micro-attractions emerged: small coffee roasters, artisan bakeries, indie clothing boutiques, and hidden bars in refurbished alleys. Online review platforms helped visitors discover them, fueling a local economy where entrepreneurial ventures thrived on curiosity seekers. Some neighborhoods responded to tourist crowds by hosting monthly craft or farmers markets, showing off local produce and homemade foods. In this synergy, tourism linked the city's heritage and contemporary aspirations, weaving them into a cohesive experience that pleased both visitors and longtime residents. Chapter 4: Addressing Social Challenges, Aging Society and Inclusivity. Like the rest of Japan, Yokohama faced the issue of an aging population. More seniors meant greater demands on healthcare, pensions, and elder care facilities. Some districts saw schools close due to fewer children, while senior centers expanded. City officials worked to develop age-friendly strategies, better bus routes with low steps, ramps, and railings in public buildings, and a push for barrier-free sidewalks. Housing companies built apartments tailored for older adults, featuring emergency call buttons and on-site caretakers. At the same time, municipal leaders recognized the need to keep young families in the city. They tried to boost childcare options by constructing more daycare centers, though waitlists still happened in busy neighborhoods. Mothers' support groups formed online, sharing tips for enrolling in daycare or balancing work schedules. Some mothers formed cooperatives to handle babysitting, allowing each parent a break or a chance to pursue part-time jobs. In parallel, companies tested flex time or remote work setups, letting parents skip peak commuting hours or handle school pickups more easily. Discussions around immigrant integration also took shape. Yokohama had a growing foreign community from Asia, South America, and other regions, filling roles in factories, retail, or nursing.
City wards offered Japanese language classes, community interpreters, and cross-cultural festivals. Many local schools introduced cultural appreciation days so children of various backgrounds could share traditions with classmates. Not everyone welcomed these changes, but overall the city's historical openness guided a sense of acceptance. With each new wave of arrivals, Yokohama's cultural mosaic thickened, reflecting an international spirit that stretched back to the treaty port era. Non-profit organizations stepped in to address leftover inequalities. Some assisted single-parent families or unemployed older adults, providing job counseling and short-term housing solutions. Others delivered food boxes to neighborhoods struggling with limited grocery access. Although Yokohama was wealthier than many rural parts of Japan, pockets of poverty remained. Volunteer groups tried bridging the gaps by running free education programs, cooking lessons, or community gardens. The city government, pressed by budget limits, welcomed such civic involvement, seeing collaboration as essential to tackle social challenges in an era of slow population growth. Chapter 5: Infrastructure Innovations and Disaster Preparedness. As Yokohama moved through the 2010s, city planners focused on further improving roads, rails, and the port to handle both everyday demands and potential emergencies. Older highways saw expansions or better interchanges, aiming to minimize rush hour jams. Additional ring roads were proposed to divert passing trucks from central wards, lowering noise and pollution near residential blocks. Trains introduced advanced safety features, including platform barriers that prevented accidental falls. Station announcements upgraded to multilingual digital displays, aiding tourists and foreign residents. Following Japan's experiences with major earthquakes, especially the 1995 Kobe quake and the 2011 Tohoku quake, Yokohama doubled down on seismic safety. Large buildings underwent retrofitting with dampers or shock absorption structures, while new developments had to meet the highest quake-resistant standards. Within communities, regular drills tested how quickly people could evacuate to designated open spaces or schoolyards. Some wards distributed emergency kits containing flashlights, first aid items, water pouches, and portable radios. Families were encouraged to store a few days' supply of food at home and arrange meeting points if separated. Preparations for large-scale tsunamis or super typhoons also advanced. Seawalls and tidal gates were strengthened along the bay, though experts debated how to balance large protective structures with public access to the water. Harbor masters introduced real-time digital monitoring of tides and weather, enabling swift warnings if a major storm surge threatened. The city's port authority tested mobile flood barriers that could be deployed around critical cargo terminals. Meanwhile, neighborhoods near riverbanks or low-lying zones formed volunteer rescue teams practicing for potential flooding scenarios. Technology played a bigger role in crisis management. Smartphone apps offered quake alerts or flooding notices alongside interactive maps showing shelter locations. Officials ran a text-based alert service in multiple languages, ensuring that foreign residents would not miss vital messages. This integrated approach, mixing infrastructure upgrades with community-led readiness, gave Yokohama a stronger sense of resilience. While no system guaranteed absolute safety against nature's fury, people took comfort that the city was more prepared than in past decades. Chapter 6: Cultural Diversity and Creative Expressions. By the mid to late 2010s, Yokohama continued evolving as a cultural crossroads. Chinatown thrived as a tourist magnet, but it also served as a living community for Chinese families, some in their second or third generation. They ran schools teaching Chinese language while also fully participating in Japanese civic life. Festivals included both Chinese events and local ward activities, bridging two traditions. Newer immigrant groups from Vietnam or the Philippines opened specialty groceries, enabling cross-cultural cooking and dialogue. Creative communities flourished around the city, not just in Minato Mirai. Old factory spaces became hubs for art studios, dance rehearsals, or photography labs. Local governments sometimes helped by granting cheap leases or small funds for cultural projects that rejuvenated neglected blocks. Public art displays, murals on alley walls, sculptures in pocket parks encouraged everyday creativity. Some artists tackled social issues like gender equality or environmental warnings about rising sea levels, sparking reflection and conversation among passers-by. Music festivals expanded in scale. The annual Yokohama Jazz Promenade drew enthusiasts from all over, with multiple venues hosting day-long performances. Ticket holders roamed from cafe stages to large auditoriums, sampling everything from smooth jazz to experimental fusion. Similarly, pop culture fans found events featuring anime, cosplay, and gaming. The city's big convention center welcomed gatherings for comic artists or indie game developers, echoing Tokyo's larger-scale fan expositions but retaining a Yokohama twist, often referencing maritime motifs or local landmarks in promotional artwork. Heritage activists also held events celebrating the city's old foreign settlement era. People dressed in Victorian-era fashions parading through the historic Bluff area or staging small reenactments of 19th century life. These events reminded visitors that Yokohama's identity was shaped by treaties and global ties from the very start. More than just nostalgia, it underscored the city's legacy of openness. Meanwhile, cafes and restaurants built on that legacy, introducing fresh fusion cuisine like ramen with unique foreign spices or Japanese-Italian seafood pasta melding local fish with Mediterranean sauces. Chapter 7: The Rise of Yokohama as a Conference and Cruise Hub. Through the late 2010s, Yokohama positioned itself as a prime location for international conferences and large gatherings. Its Pacifico Yokohama complex, along with other convention facilities, hosted summits on tech, environment, and economic cooperation. Global experts flew in, often enjoying scenic harbor views during break times. Delegates praised the city's organized transport network, easy hotel access, and the relaxed contrast compared to Tokyo's frenetic energy. At the same time, cruise tourism rose. Large passenger liners found Yokohama's upgraded Osenbashi Pier convenient, with modern architecture offering a spacious rooftop deck that doubled as a mini park. Cruise travelers stepping off ships found well-marked signs pointing to Chinatown, the red brick warehouse, or train stations leading to Tokyo. Some spent multiple days exploring local spots, Chinatown's restaurants, Motomoshi's chic shops, or museum exhibitions in the old foreign settlement area. This boost in maritime tourism gave local shops and guides extra business. Economic watchers noted that these conferences and cruise activities created a visitor economy, sustaining hotels, dining, and retail. City guides were trained in different languages, from English and Chinese to Spanish or French, depending on expected arrivals. Universities also developed hospitality or tourism management courses, teaching students the art of event planning and cross-cultural communication. Meanwhile, the Port Authority refined procedures to swiftly process large numbers of cruise passengers. Even small local entrepreneurs caught the wave, running shuttle vans, souvenir kiosks, or pop-up cafes near the pier. Some residents grumbled about more tourist crowds or the occasional traffic tie-ups when a big liner docked, yet many welcomed the energy and global flavor. Local festivals sometimes aligned with cruise arrivals, letting passengers witness a lively open-air performance or sample street food in a carnival atmosphere. All told, the city's synergy of modern commerce, cultural attractions, and well-organized transit made Yokohama a favored stop, whether for business gatherings or seaborne travelers crossing the Pacific or East Asia routes. Chapter 8: Preparing for New Threats, Health Emergencies, and Evolving Technology. In the final years of the 2010s, global challenges took on new forms. Public health emergencies such as outbreaks of contagious diseases prompted citywide drills in vaccination, contact tracing, and hospital preparedness. Officials recognized that with international travel, pathogens could arrive swiftly. Yokohama's status as a port city meant high volumes of foreign arrivals and departures. Thus, local health departments established stricter screening measures at the pier and airport, like procedures for ships, including temperature checks and quarantine protocols. Technological advances continued transforming daily routines. Many residents used smartphones for booking train tickets, grocery deliveries, or paying bills. The city introduced digital signage in multiple languages at busy intersections, showing directions, event announcements, or emergency alerts. Some wards tested AI-driven customer service kiosks in city offices, allowing residents to handle simple tasks without waiting in long lines. At the same time, older citizens needed help adapting to digital systems, prompting volunteer programs where tech-savvy youths coached seniors on phone use and online safety. Debates arose over privacy and data collection, especially as cameras multiplied around the city for traffic control or security. Advocates argued that these measures improved safety and public order, while critics warned about a potential surveillance culture if left unchecked. City Hall tried to strike a balance, passing regulations on data storage and requiring periodic reviews of camera placements. In parallel, open data initiatives gave researchers and local groups access to anonymized city stats, spurring innovative apps for route finding, public event listings, or public health tracking. Climate concerns also deepened. With global temperatures rising, scientists predicted heavier rains or more frequent typhoons hitting the region. Yokohama's drainage systems and flood defenses were tested in intense storms, leading to calls for further upgrades. Environmental groups joined experts in urging green infrastructure like expanding wetlands along rivers or building more permeable surfaces to reduce flash floods. Meanwhile, some port operators explored greener fuels for cargo ships, hoping to reduce carbon footprints. The tension between industrial demands and ecological care remained a defining challenge. Chapter 9: Social Harmonies and the Next Generation. In the early 2020s, Yokohama focused on fostering social harmony in a rapidly shifting world. Community centers offered language and cultural exchange programs, bridging local Japanese folks with immigrants from Asia, Africa, or Latin America. High school clubs formed buddy systems, pairing local teens with newly arrived foreign students, encouraging mutual learning. These efforts built on Yokohama's history of blending cultures since the treaty port era. Over time, local wards reported improvements in neighborly ties as small gestures like celebrating each other's holidays became more common. Youth activists emerged, championing causes like environment, gender equality, and mental health. They organized park cleanups or petitioned for more mental health support in schools. Social media hashtags spread these initiatives quickly, sometimes drawing collaboration from students in other Japanese cities. City Hall responded with fresh budgets for youth training programs, acknowledging that today's teenagers would soon shape local policy. At the same time, older folks shared life wisdom, reminding younger generations how the city had overcome war, ruins, quake damage, and economic ups and downs. Groups advocating for the elderly demanded expansions of assisted living facilities, in-home nursing, and barrier-free sidewalks. They pointed out that an inclusive Yokohama must ensure seniors remain active participants in community life. Some wards set up senior-friendly midday gatherings featuring health checks, light exercise classes, or craft workshops. In these events, the boundary between old and young occasionally blurred, with kids volunteering to help elders navigate phone apps or VR demonstrations. Women's roles continued evolving. More mothers balanced careers with family, aided by improved daycares and flexible corporate policies. Yet a portion of the workforce still reported wage gaps and slow promotions. Some workplaces addressed this by forming committees on diversity, while local groups offered mentorship to aspiring female managers or entrepreneurs. The city's track record of adapting to global trends fueled optimism that generational changes would gradually open more opportunities. Chapter 10: Late 2010s and Beyond. A city embracing its roots and future. As the 2010s drew to a close, Yokohama reflected on its remarkable evolution. The port that once symbolized Japan's gateway to the world continued humming with cargo and cruise ships. Minato Mirai 21 skyline, once merely a plan on paper, now defined a horizon of shining towers and bright night displays. Chinatown, the Bluff, and Yamate carried traces of international legacies, while new tech zones pursued the next wave of AI, biotech, and digital breakthroughs. Cultural festivals, youth engagement, and robust public spaces created a lively daily life. The city's challenges persisted, coping with an aging population, ensuring every neighborhood shared the fruits of development, refining disaster resilience, and minimizing environmental impact. Yet a quiet confidence ran through official statements, local events, and community discussions. After surviving war devastation, quake aftershocks, bubble crashes, and shifting global trends, Yokohama demonstrated that resilience, openness, and steady renewal were in its DNA. Looking ahead, the city recognized the need to keep forging ties across the globe. Sister city programs, trade missions, and tours and promotions would keep Yokohama relevant in a world of rapid technological leaps and evolving cultural tastes. Residents from toddlers in daycare to seniors in retirement clubs found ways to stay connected through festivals, markets, sports clubs, and online networks. Whether building on the city's treaty port heritage or harnessing modern digital innovation, Yokohama's identity remained that of a harbor always ready to welcome new ships, new people, and new ideas.
Part 10. Yokohama in the 2020s and beyond. Resilience, innovation, and the road ahead. Chapter 1. Entering the 2020s. Adjusting to a rapidly changing world. As the 2020s dawned, Yokohama found itself navigating a world of swift shifts and uncertainties. Advances in digital technology, ongoing global health challenges, and evolving social values all shaped how the city functioned. Building on the late 2010s momentum, Yokohama aimed to maintain its reputation for balanced growth, combining a welcoming harbor, high-tech industries, and cultural vibrancy. At the same time, city leaders recognized the need to remain flexible in the face of surprises. Global health emergencies forced renewed attention on public health. Yokohama, with its large population and busy port, ramped up disease monitoring at entry points like Osunbashi Pier. Screening methods, vaccination drives, and quarantine protocols could activate quickly if new threats emerged. Workplaces adopted more remote or hybrid setups to reduce crowding, while schools incorporated distance learning tools for times when in-person classes became risky. Although not everyone found online formats easy, the shift emphasized how crucial digital infrastructure and equitable internet access were to modern life. On the economic side, some local businesses reorganized for greater agility. Restaurants expanded takeout or delivery services, using apps and mobile payments more widely. Tech firms refined telecommuting software, seeing a permanent role for work from home. Even the city government offered digital forms and e-signatures for certain procedures, reducing the need for in-person visits to ward offices. Traditional shops adapted by marketing their goods on social media, shipping specialty items nationwide. Tour operators, faced with fewer foreign travelers, promoted local tourism, inviting nearby residents to explore hidden corners of Yokohama's older wards. Yet the city remained open to the world in spirit. As travel restrictions eventually eased, overseas visitors trickled back, drawn by Yokohama's waterfront lights, varied dining, and historical neighborhoods. The local tourism bureau worked with cultural groups to produce online content, virtual tours, live-streamed performances, so that even potential visitors still abroad could experience the city from a distance. This laid groundwork for a new era of hybrid cultural engagement, blending on-site events and digital platforms for global reach. In daily life, many families continued to enjoy a stable routine, children attending schools in improved facilities, parents balancing commutes or remote work, and seniors partaking in ward-run exercise programs. The city's robust public services, from well-funded libraries to extensive parks, remained central to residents' quality of life. A quieter sense of resilience permeated conversations, reminding everyone that, across its history, Yokohama had overcome calamities by learning, adapting, and forging fresh paths forward. Chapter 2. Technological advancements and evolving work culture. The 2020s saw rapid tech innovations that Yokohama eagerly embraced. High-speed internet, 5G connectivity, and new digital tools expanded how people lived and worked. Companies embedded artificial intelligence (AI) into production lines or office processes, enhancing tasks like supply chain management, customer service, and translation. Startups in robotics, data analytics, or clean energy found space in older factory districts converted into innovation hubs. These collaborative environments allowed entrepreneurs to share resources and expertise, nurturing new ideas. With the rise of telework and flexible schedules, residents juggled commutes less frequently, freeing time for personal pursuits or child-rearing. Some vacant retail areas turned into co-working spots near suburban train stations, offering short-term desk rentals. The city encouraged this trend to reduce peak congestion and distribute economic activity across more neighborhoods. Broadband expansions reached older wards, helping small businesses pivot online for marketing, order management or video-based customer interactions. Offices that remained in central Minato Mirai or downtown wards introduced hot desking, letting employees reserve shared workstations only on days they came in person. This approach saved money on large permanent offices and responded to employees' calls for flexible arrangements. Freed from the daily commute grind, workers spent more time in local communities, supporting neighborhood cafes or shops near their homes. Despite some resistance from those who prized traditional office culture, the pandemic experiences had normalized telework for many roles, making it a lasting feature. Smart city concepts also grew. The city tested AI-based traffic lights that sensed real-time flows, adjusting signals to reduce idling cars and shorten travel times. Public transit apps integrated route planning, seat availability data, and e-payment, removing the need to juggle multiple tickets or passes. Trash collection used sensors to optimize pickup routes, minimizing fuel and noise in residential streets. These systems, combined with Yokohama's emphasis on eco-friendly measures, aimed to create a more livable environment even in the face of continuous urban expansion. However, not everyone benefited equally. Some older citizens or low-income groups struggled with new digital demands, like using apps for basic tasks or scanning QR codes for services. Volunteers and local groups organized classes and help desks, bridging generational or skill gaps. Over time, the city realized that genuine progress required ensuring no one got left behind. E-libraries, mobile phone help workshops, and ward offices with in-person support offered ways to keep connectivity accessible for all ages and income levels. Chapter 3: Environmental Goals and Climate Adaptation. Building on earlier decades of green awareness, Yokohama further strengthened its environmental aims in the 2020s. Encouraged by global accords and rising public concern about climate change, the city set targets for cutting carbon emissions and increasing renewable energy usage. Local government replaced diesel-powered buses with electric or hydrogen-fueled models. Car-sharing networks expanded, letting people rent electric cars by the hour, reducing personal vehicle ownership. Bike lanes multiplied on major roads, supplemented by well-placed racks and safer crossings. Large buildings in Minato Mirai 21 installed advanced solar panels on rooftops, some employing battery storage to supply power after dark. Factories near the port upgraded machinery for lower energy consumption, spurred by both local regulations and global supply chain pressures. A few pilot projects tested floating solar farms in the bay, although concerns about shipping lanes limited their scale. Meanwhile, expansions of green belts and small urban forests helped absorb carbon, cool surfaces, and create wildlife habitats, a far cry from the heavily industrial waterfront of earlier eras. The city also tackled water management. Engineers upgraded drainage tunnels and pumps to cope with heavier rainfall events. Retention basins were built underground in certain parks, storing excess rainwater to prevent flash floods. River embankments got taller or reinforced, mindful that typhoons might become more intense. The government introduced public education campaigns about flood risks, urging residents in low-lying areas to keep emergency kits. Neighborhood watch groups tested flood simulation drills, learning routes to higher ground or multi-story shelters. Beyond physical projects, attitudes shifted. Corporations embraced green branding, adopting zero-waste office cultures or offsetting carbon footprints through local tree planting. City-run events, from large festivals to smaller gatherings, implemented waste reduction rules: no single-use plastics, mandatory recycling bins, and an emphasis on eco-friendly items. Schools wove environmental science deeper into lessons, encouraging children to track local wildlife sightings or measure daily energy consumption at home. Yet challenges remained. Air pollution spikes sometimes reoccurred on days with high industrial output or heavy traffic. Some older communities lacked funds to retrofit houses for better insulation or solar panels. Debates about bigger projects like building more offshore wind farms lingered,
with fishery concerns or shipping route conflicts. Still, the city's overall push for ecological health marked a contrast to the unchecked industrial expansions of the past, reflecting a new era of responsibility. Chapter 4. Social ties and aging gracefully. The aging population persisted as a central issue. Yokohama introduced or expanded community care models, letting seniors stay in their own homes with regular visits from nurses or social workers. Some wards offered meal delivery programs while volunteer groups assisted with light housekeeping or errands. Senior centers organized day programs with exercise, crafts, or music, aiming to keep older adults physically active and socially connected. Technology helped too. Telemedicine apps allowed remote consultations, and alarm systems notified relatives if a senior fell or didn't move around for hours. To sustain these efforts, the city hired more caregivers and bilingual staff to support elders from diverse backgrounds. Students or part-time workers sometimes gained wage subsidies for training in elder care roles. Observers noted that bridging the caretaker gap required more than just extra money. It called for a cultural shift valuing care work as essential community labor. Governments and non-profits tried to champion this message, hosting appreciation events for nurses, home aides, and volunteers. Meanwhile, families with children benefited from continued expansions of daycare, after-school clubs, and safer playgrounds. Single parents found more flexible job openings or remote possibilities, lessening the burden of old commuting norms. Municipal programs that matched empty nester seniors with young adults seeking cheap housing emerged, forming home share arrangements. This arrangement offered companionship for elders and affordable rent for newcomers, further weaving social bonds. Intergenerational gatherings became common. Festivals paired seniors' craft workshops with children's dance recitals, or local bands performed for multi-age audiences. Younger people learned older traditions like calligraphy, tea ceremony, or local festival drumming, while elders explored online hobbies or cross-cultural cooking classes. These bridging activities helped ensure that as Yokohama modernized, it did not lose the communal warmth that had carried it through many hardships in past decades. Chapter 5. The port's evolving role in a global economy. Amid changing trade patterns, Yokohama's port adapted to new economic realities. Though still handling containerized goods for Japan's industrial base, some shipping lines faced competition from faster or cheaper Asian ports. To stay relevant, the Port Authority invested in further automation, like robotic cargo loaders and advanced scheduling software to reduce delays. They also offered specialized terminals for high-value or fragile cargo, drawing niche shipping firms that prized reliability over cost alone. Meanwhile, expansions in e-commerce changed the nature of shipments. Parcels, small electronics, and specialty foods moved in bulk. Distribution centers near the city featured state-of-the-art sorting lines to handle thousands of packages an hour, linking with trucks or smaller vans that delivered directly to customers across the region. This shift created extra jobs in logistics, from forklift operators to software technicians. However, some older dock workers lamented a decline in traditional cargo, replaced by more automated procedures. Cruise travel remained vital. The city courted cruise lines by offering improved passenger facilities at Osenbashi Pier, letting tourists disembark swiftly and enjoy guided tours or free roaming exploration. Partnerships with local hotels and bus firms ensured that shore excursions ran smoothly, highlighting Yokohama's best attractions. Some lines even embarked Japanese-themed cruises from Yokohama, traveling around the archipelago or onward to other Asian ports. These tours integrated cultural experiences like kimono fittings or sake tastings, turning the city into a launching pad for maritime adventures. Officials also explored the possibility of green shipping. Collaborating with shipping alliances, they tested alternative fuels like LNG, liquefied natural gas, or advanced biofuels. The hope was to reduce carbon emissions from large vessels while maintaining throughput. Environmental groups praised the city's efforts, though they cautioned that adopting new fuels on a wide scale required global cooperation. Still, these incremental steps toward cleaner maritime operations mirrored Yokohama's legacy of blending progress with conscientious stewardship. mindful that the port was not only an economic engine but also a major influence on local air, water, and daily life. Chapter 6: Cultural Fusion and Neighborhood Revitalization. Through the early 2020s, culture in Yokohama embraced the city's international spirit, with more fusion events that merged Japanese tradition and foreign influences. New subcultures emerged among younger residents, who blended street fashion, anime references, and maritime imagery in their clothes or art. Some local cafes offered cross-cuisine menus, pairing classic Japanese dishes with unexpected twists like ramen spiced with Mediterranean herbs or sushi rolls stuffed with Latin-inspired fillings. Chinatown expanded its cultural offerings, adding language schools and hosting talk sessions on Chinese history and modern life. The older houses in the Yamate district, perched on the hills with Western architectural flair, were opened more often for historical tours, wedding venues, or art displays. In smaller neighborhoods outside the tourist corridors, local associations revived century-old shrine festivals that had faded, inviting young families to decorate floats or carry mikoshi through narrow streets. Urban planners promoted neighborhood revitalization beyond the glittering bayfront. Some wards introduced community-driven Machizukuri town-making workshops where residents brainstormed how to spruce up shopping alleys, remodel vacant homes, or create mini-parks. Local grants and volunteer labor turned rundown corners into bright murals, pocket libraries, or pop-up snack stalls featuring local produce. This approach prevented the city's renewal from being exclusively top-down. Instead, it honored the idea that grassroots efforts could keep older wards vibrant, ensuring they weren't overshadowed by big commercial projects in Minato Mirai. Amid these positive changes, city watchers worried about rising rents near new cultural hotspots which could push out long-standing residents or small businesses. Gentrification debates flared whenever a new cafe or art space replaced an older, more affordable shop. Officials tried to manage this by encouraging mixed-income housing or preserving certain blocks under historical or cultural zoning. Such delicate balancing tested Yokohama's ability to integrate modern expansions without losing the friendly local spirit treasured by older communities. Chapter 7: Health Crises and Community Strength. As global health threats occasionally surfaced, Yokohama's experience hosting large-scale events and operating major transport gateways helped it adapt. The city refined public health procedures, from airport-style screenings at the port to contact tracing if an outbreak hit. Staff at hospitals gained fresh training in epidemic response, and some wards designated extra facilities for emergencies. Apps or phone hotlines provided symptom checklists, clinic hours, or real-time updates on vaccine availability. Neighborhood watch groups showed heightened solidarity, helping seniors or disabled residents with grocery runs when cautious distancing was advised. This sense of compassion mirrored past experiences like the Great Kanto earthquake or wartime devastation, when community bonds proved essential for survival. Social media platforms accelerated mutual aid, letting local volunteers coordinate deliveries or share official bulletins quickly. Younger folks assisted older family members or neighbors in setting up telemedicine calls, bridging the digital divide. Business owners learned to pivot swiftly. Restaurants extended takeout menus, installing plexiglass barriers for dine-in customers. Retailers moved to online orders or curbside pickups. Tech-savvy entrepreneurs developed new solutions, like queue management apps or digital booking for municipal services, minimizing crowds in waiting rooms. Cultural festivals became hybrid or partly virtual, streaming performances with limited in-person audiences. Though not the same as a bustling carnival, these partial solutions at least preserved cultural continuity. Over time, the city's flexible mindset proved key. Even after each health concern lessened, many practices lingered: hand sanitizing stations, alternative work arrangements, and an expectation that public health advice might shift rapidly. Economic resilience also strengthened as businesses carried contingency plans. The city's readiness to come together during disruptions boosted local pride, recalling a long history of rallying after earthquakes, wars, or recessions. In daily life, gratitude for small moments like strolling the harbor at sunset ran deep, reminding people that Yokohama's core spirit had always been about community care amid constant change. Chapter 8: Education, Youth and Fostering Future Leaders. Education in Yokohama evolved to meet the demands of a globalized, tech-driven society. Schools integrated programming, robotics, and critical thinking into curriculums, often partnering with local universities or companies. Some classes used VR to simulate historical events like the Treaty Port opening or the Great Kanto earthquake, making lessons more immersive. Teachers found ways to link local heritage with future-focused skills, ensuring students gained an appreciation for the city's roots while preparing them for tomorrow's careers. Extracurricular clubs thrived, including robotics teams, environmental groups, and cultural associations that mixed Japanese traditions with foreign insights. Students took field trips to factories or labs, learning about engineering or green technology firsthand. Others visited historical neighborhoods or museums, discussing how Yokohama overcame hardships. High schoolers often participated in volunteer projects, cleanup drives, festival organization, or language support for non-Japanese speakers, deepening their sense of civic duty. Scholarships and exchange programs let college-age youth study abroad or intern with multinational firms in Minato Mirai. They returned with broader perspectives on workforce expectations, community engagement, or entrepreneurial best practices. The city recognized these global links as crucial to sustaining competitive industries and continuing Yokohama's legacy of outward vision. Youth summits on local problems like plastic waste in the bay or bridging generational gaps provided fresh voices, prompting City Hall to adapt policies. Libraries bolstered digital resources, hosting coding workshops or online courses. For younger children, story times featuring bilingual picture books nurtured inclusive attitudes. Middle and high schools tackled social issues like bullying, mental health, and inclusive gender roles, aiming for well-rounded personal development. Combined, these educational priorities shaped Yokohama's next wave of leaders, keeping the city relevant, compassionate, and innovative in a turbulent world. Chapter 9. Enhancing city identity through festivals and international links. While Yokohama grew more advanced, it also strengthened festivals that honored its past and cross-cultural DNA. Annual events like the Port Festival and Chinatown's Lunar New Year gained even more scale, using digital marketing to draw visitors from overseas. Fireworks displays over the bay resonated with people who cherished the city's maritime legacy. The red brick warehouse and converted dock buildings served as stages for pop-up fairs, holiday markets, and live music. With each year, fresh themes emerged, celebrating new technologies, environmental progress, or artistic styles from around the globe. Sister city relationships deepened. Delegations traveled both ways, forging trade agreements, academic exchanges, and cultural showcases. Perhaps a folk dance troupe from Europe performed at a local festival, while a Yokohama jazz ensemble flew abroad for a sister city concert. Street corners occasionally filled with languages other than Japanese, underscoring Yokohama's open worldly spirit since its treaty port founding. This synergy of local customs and global touches made daily life rich, boosting the city's brand as a friendly metropolis that honors tradition while welcoming modern influences. Cafes and older wards displayed historical photographs revealing how the same spot looked decades ago, once a battered ruin or an Edo-era fishing dock, now a cozy modern establishment. Younger generations realized their city's layered transformation was unique. No other Japanese port had quite the same blend of survival stories, foreign footprints, and creative renewal. Local volunteer guides offered walking routes that spanned time periods, visiting sites of quake memorials, war memorials, and bright new structures. Tourists and residents alike found these living lessons captivating. Meanwhile, local media, TV channels, newspapers, websites shined light on smaller communities, from old temples near the outskirts to fresh art hubs near station plazas. People discovered that modern Yokohama wasn't just Minato Mirai or Chinatown. It included hidden shrines, small shopping arcades, and lively local festivals that might be unknown to outsiders. Through festival nights, boisterous chanting, lanterns glowing, and Mikoshi shrines on shoulders, these local events tied neighborhoods together, reaffirming that Yokohama's identity was not solely shaped by global commerce but also by heartfelt traditions handed down through generations. Chapter 10. Yokohama's ongoing path, embracing future challenges and possibilities. As the city entered the 2020s and looked beyond, Yokohama confronted emerging challenges with the resilience it had honed over centuries. Having survived war, quakes, economic highs and lows, and repeated transformations, it carried a collective memory of rebirth. The city's present and future revolved around technology, cultural openness, and an unwavering sense of community care. In the realm of technology, Yokohama strove to be a testing ground for AI-driven traffic control, robotics in healthcare, and advanced environmental modeling. Employers welcomed remote or hybrid work, lessening pressure on congested commuter lines. Online platforms let residents easily request municipal services, report issues, or sign up for events, fostering a direct link between City Hall and the public. As digital footprints expanded, so did discussions about privacy, algorithmic fairness, and the possibility of automation displacing jobs. Meanwhile, the city's culture thrived. Creative industries used old warehouses for film sets, virtual reality labs, or indie music festivals, bridging physical and digital artistry. Jazz clubs, anime conventions, and live events ensured nightly excitement. Environmental activists pushed the city to meet stricter carbon-neutral goals, urging more solar rooftops, EV charging stations, and zero-waste shops. Some wards introduced local currencies or time banking, reinforcing neighborly bonds. Citizens recognized that new problems, climate extremes, rapid tech shifts, global pandemics could appear at any moment, so they learned to stay flexible. Education advanced a global worldview. Students connected with peers in sister cities via virtual exchanges. Teachers included coding and climate science in regular lessons, and colleges groomed future leaders in international relations, marine technology, or robotics. The city tapped these youthful talents, offering internships or mentorships so bright minds might stay local, fueling Yokohama's next leaps in innovation. In daily life, families merged modern convenience with cherished traditions, like passing local shrines en route to new shopping complexes or practicing tea ceremony at local community halls, while also using phone apps to order groceries. Elderly and youth shared facilities or co-housing models, bridging generational gaps with mutual support. This tapestry of lifestyles, from high-rise dwellers by the bay to suburban orchard keepers, reflected a city that honored personal choice and collective welfare. Thus, in the early 2020s, Yokohama continued writing its story, a port city grounded in centuries of open exchange and resilience, yet always adapting to fresh winds of change. Having once been a sleepy coastal spot, then a treaty port, then a site of post-war ruin, it had risen time and again. Now a global-minded metropolis, Yokohama looked to the horizon, ready to chart the next course on the tide of technology, cultural creativity, and social unity.